Good evening. We're here for the special January 10, 2017 meeting of the Brattleboro Selectboard. I call that meeting to order at 5:30. I want to welcome everybody who's watching, anybody who's watching, either live or recorded on BCTV. I want to welcome a member of the press, BCTV operator, and our ASL interpreter. I also want to welcome everybody who's in attendance this evening. We know the meeting, Jan's been officially warned.
Yes, it has.
Thank you. The meeting tonight is going to focus on two primary matters, that being hoping to make substantial headway on moving towards completion of the FY18 budget and dealing with solar net metering credits and agreements. The first item on tonight's agenda is Chair's remarks, and I have no particular remarks this evening. The next item is Town Manager's comments.
I also have none other than the agenda items. Thank you.
Select Board comments, committee reports. Anybody on Select Board have anything that they want to offer? Dick?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to follow your lead, as last week you announced that you would not be seeking re-election, and I will not be seeking re-election for the next coming year. So I encourage people to take a petition out, and hopefully nothing against senior citizens, because all the people to my left are all senior citizens. But I hope some younger people feel compelled to get involved in local government and take out a petition and be a part of what I think is a great process in our community.
Thank you, Dick.
So Missy won that argument?
She did.
Hey, Allison lost. Just wanted to make sure on that one.
All right. Anything else from anybody on the board? So the next item on the agenda is public participation. This is a good time for anybody who's in attendance, who wants to speak to something that's not on the agenda, to step forward and do so. Anybody want to speak under public participation? Jerry?
Are you going to be covering budgeting for...
The mic will get you covered on, capture your audio on TV.
What?
The microphone
The other mic.
will allow you to
Not
hear
the
on
mic
TV.
That
Or Mike Lukassi.
I'm confused.
Speak into the mic.
To the microphone to be heard on TV.
Let
There
me
you
hear a melody. No. Are you going to be covering the budget for roads and sidewalks tonight?
Yes, we will, during the budget discussion, if you have a specific comment about the budget for sidewalks and roads, that would be an appropriate time to make the comment. If you want to do it now, you can also do that, whatever you prefer.
I'll wait. I want to listen.
Good.
Yeah, thanks.
Glad to have you here. Anybody else have anything they want to add during public participation? All right, so the unfinished business tonight is completion of the FY18 budget. I want to thank Peter for preparing for us and circulating his memo dated January 5 with attachments that helped to address a series of issues that we have to deal with. And I felt that in order to try to get to a point where we could move in a linear fashion efficiently through all the issues that are in front of us, that it would help to outline everything that we've got for decision and some of the ramifications of some of those decisions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to outline the questions that we have to decide tonight. I do have the board there with some markers and some paper, and I may wind up listing some of those things so that everybody can see them visually. We also have another handout that flows from a discussion that I had this morning with the town manager, outlining some impacts of various decisions we're going to make tonight. And I hope that we can move through all of these decisions this evening so that we can get a budget revised to us for next Tuesday's meeting. So I'm going to start by noting that I think there are 9 or 10 or 11 issues to be decided tonight. I'm going to list them off. I can also write them out. Maybe I'll just write them as I say them. All right? So, we have to make a decision about whether we want to buy the pellet boiler. So I'm just going to write pellet boiler. And when I refer to pellet boiler, it's for both the library and the municipal center. We have to make a decision whether we're leaving in the budget the library energy saving measures. And then the municipal center, MC, municipal center energy measures. We've got a question about the pool hours. And then about use of the Creamery Bridge. That's what it's called, right? The Creamery Bridge? Creamery Bridge. There were some proposed fire cuts that were suggested when we were talking initially about buying the pumper rescue.
Yeah.
Then we have the energy coordinator. Hope everybody can read the way I'm writing. Buying the pumper rescue, and then financing the pumper rescue. All right, so those are the primary decisions that we have to make tonight. I'll also note that along with those decisions, we essentially need to make a call about what the tax rate should be. And that's why I met with Peter this morning and we prepared this additional memo, because the different scenarios relating to what the tax rate's going to be will impact how much, if any, money is left behind in the fund balance, the general fund balance, for potential application next year. And so I think what I'd like to do for starters is to explain some of this data in this handout so that we're all beginning from the same foundation. Peter's got some comments to make about what he hopes the tax rate's going to be and why, and how our decision about this year's tax rate and this year's use of fund balance will impact long-term tax rates, and that's part of what the January 5th memo addressed. And so he'll make those comments as well. But what I'm going to start by doing is explaining what we've got here. First off, the current budget, and Peter, you'll correct me if I'm wrong as I go through this, please.
Sure.
The current budget calls for $14,499,000 in change to be raised through property taxes. And that was a 5.5 cent increase as originally given to us. But as noted in last week's memo and in the last week's meeting and the memo that we got, we have essentially saved $98,339 already based upon issues that have been discussed previously by the board. So those include the increase in workers' comp, the decrease in general liability, the decrease in various lease expenses, the increase in solid waste expenses, because they're going to be shutting that down over the course of the next year, and the increased transfer into the general fund from parking. So, in addition, in order to, Peter explained the next $20,000 item. The $20,000, I believe, means that we would have, you explain it, please.
Sure. The board made a tentative decision, but you didn't actually vote on it. When you took a couple of straw polls at our last meeting, you indicated your intent unanimously to buy the pumper rescue, and you indicated a preference by majority to buy the pumper rescue with cash. Because of the probability that in your further discussion tonight, you would firm that up and make a final decision to buy it with cash, or at least you might do that. I thought it was important for you to know of this nuance to it, which is, we spoke about this briefly in last week's meeting, but we have $1,161,000 available. I'll give you an exact number here in a second. In the amount of fund balance that's above and beyond the 10% guideline, we currently have sorry.
One 163,933.
Where is it?
It's paragraph 3 on the second page of your memo.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Yep. So in enumerated paragraph 3 on page 2 of my memo, 1,163,933 is what is available above and beyond the 10%. In the original proposed budget, there is $634,225 worth of use of fund balance. That's the $500,000 in capital expenses as a transfer to the capital fund, and $134,225 as a balancing figure. That's the carryover from last year when the decision was made to use $134,225 last year and the same amount this year to help smooth in the impact of the bond payments for the police fire facilities project. If we buy the pumper rescue truck with cash, that's an additional $550,000. The total of the $634,225 that's already in the budget and the $550 of additional use of fund balance would be a total use of fund balance for fiscal 18 of $1,184,225. It's $1,184,225. The difference between the $1,184,225 and the $1,163,933 is $20,292. The reason for showing that in the math on the handout this evening is because in order to adhere to our 10% guideline, we shouldn't use, $1.18 million when we've got $1.16 million available. And so the math on this page assumes that the select board will choose to buy the truck and will choose to buy it with cash, and that buying it with cash means $529,708 will come from the fund balance, and $20,292 will come from current revenues from the taxes that'll be raised next year. So it's just a nuance to this in order to adhere to our 10% guideline that we needed to show an additional cost against property taxes for FY18 of $20,292. It turns out completely by coincidence that that's just about a wash with the $19,500 that you decided last week to increase in the parking fund transfer to the general fund. So while in the memo you saw that the projected tax rate was an increase of 4.6 cents in the current situation that we're in, after we had a lot of discussion last week of being at 4.8 cents, we're actually back at 4.8 cents for the starting point for tonight's discussion because of this $20,000 adjustment. Is that, I see some.
That's okay. We're going to just move right on from this.
Okay.
And then next.
You're more articulate.
May I, seriously, I want to make sure that that's not too confusing because
Well,
I see
I think you
looks.
threw me the curve when you said the offset. We were at 4.6 and then with the 20,000. And then you
Yeah.
said we had an offset, so why
So,
did we
okay,
increase with the offset?
One more time slowly. So we were
Okay.
at 4.8 when we were talking about it last week.
Okay, yeah,
And near the end of the meeting, you made a decision
Right.
to increase the transfer from parking to general fund
Goes
by
to
$19,500.
4.6.
So what we brought forward to you in the memo preparing for tonight showed the 4.6. After doing the work on this today, we realized that this $20,000
Sure.
the fact that we would have spent the available fund balance by $20,000 hadn't been included in the math that we had shown you so far.
Okay.
So we're showing it right now at the start of the meeting, so
Okay.
you know where we're starting. We're back to 4.8
Okay,
cents.
thank you.
All right, so what that means is that the current scenario, including buying the pumper rescue with cash, would be a 4.8 cent tax increase. So, we then took two of the bigger items for decision tonight and provided you with some explanation of what the budget would look like at various tax rates, including those decisions. So I'm going to take the first one. As you know from reading the materials and from being here last week, it sounds like there's some solid questions about whether we should be buying this pellet boiler. And there's actually another boiler at the fire station that can be repurposed to serve the library. So, assuming, just for purposes of discussion now, that we're going to say we're not buying the pellet boiler, that will save us $205,808 after we add like $10,000 in to repurpose the fire department boiler for the library by adding a chamber or two. So, that would then take down the budget, which is now $14,421,047 in revenue that needs to be raised by property taxes by $205,808, which would mean by property taxes we'd have to raise $14,215,239. Right? Your brow is forward a little, but you're with me, Dick?
Right.
That include the $10,000 that?
It does, so it's a 215,808 reduction, and then the $10,000 for the relocation to the
Okay.
library
Yep.
makes the net savings 205.
Okay,
And we'll talk a little bit about more about that later, because the actual cost of the boiler is way less than all the infrastructure that would have to be laid to use a boiler for both facilities. All right, so if we take 205 off of the 421, it brings us to 14,215,239 that needs to be raised by property taxes. Now, if we go with the 4.8 cent tax rate, which is what we're currently at, it'll leave $209,000 in the fund balance. Conversely, if we have a 3 cent tax increase, it will leave us with zero carryover fund balance for next year. And then Peter gave us some intermediate projections. A 3.5 cent tax increase will leave almost $60,000 in the fund balance. And then a 4 cent tax increase will leave us with 116 in the fund balance over the 10% guideline. All right? Next, we have an option that removes the $70,929 that's in this year's capital plan for energy-saving equipment at the municipal center, and speaks to what the tax rate increases would be and how much money would be left in the fund balance. I'm not going to go through that one separately, because I can't imagine we're going to do that independent of the pellet boiler decision. But then, the last set of items talk about if we make the decision both to not buy the pellet boiler and not do the energy efficiency work at the municipal center. That would result in total money that needs to be raised through property taxes of $14,144,310, right? Because we're removing $276,737 from the capital budget. And then a 2.4 cent increase leaves no fund balance over the 10% guideline. 4.8 cent increase leaves $278,000 in the fund balance over the 10% guideline, and then you see intermediate steps between those. And I thought it was way important for us to have that data laid out so that everybody knows the impact on the fund balance of various decisions we might make about the tax rate increase for next year. Does anybody have any questions about that? Dick?
in the last scenario where you talk about the 276, is that it says no pellet boiler and no municipal options. So that is still inclusive of the air handler at the library.
That's correct. The air handler, actually, it's inclusive of all of the recommended improvements. The air handler and the, I think there was 3 separate, relatively
Glass,
small,
Glass and
All
and the
at
windows and all the energy package for the library would be still included.
Okay, and then everything would be excluded from the municipal center.
That's
Correct.
correct.
Okay.
Yep.
All right,
you.
so any other questions about that? So the only other thing that I want to do before diving into those individual items, unless there's questions, anybody in the audience have any questions? I mean, anybody in attendance? Ms. Bosworth?
Just a couple clarifying questions. The boiler that's proposed to be moved to the library has a bunch of life left in it. What's the story? So it's sort of a long-term decision. It's not a short-term decision.
Was bought last year when the other boiler passed away.
And the no energy savings measures for the municipal center is because no long-term decision has been made about staying here yet. Is that correct?
There's a number of different reasons why. We talked some last week, and we'll talk more about some this week.
All right, thanks.
just on this, while we're on the boiler, the boiler also has to be expanded.
Has to be, and
Yes,
it costs
and what is-
$10K to move it and expand it.
Right, and then what is the effect of expanding it on this life expectancy?
I don't, I believe it will have no impact. The way that we discussed that, I was asked that question earlier today, and I was not able to get a absolute answer to the question that expanding a boiler never diminishes its useful life. But I can tell you that the way that we arrived at the recommendation was in looking at where we found ourselves and the mixed sentiment of the board and generally skeptical position of the board related to the pellet boiler, but needing to replace the boiler, knowing that we're in a situation where we can't avoid that cost at the library. We were looking at how to approach that in the smartest manner with a more traditional replacement. And in looking at that, the possibility of reusing this 1-year-old boiler from the fire department came up. When we explored that, both Steve Horton, as our advisor on this, and the boiler people recommended to us that it would be a proper reuse of that to disassemble it, move it up here, reassemble it, and expand it to meet the greater needs of the library. No one at any time suggested that there was any offsetting concern related to the expansion of the capacity being something that would diminish its useful life. So I don't believe it would.
Can I just ask because I'm interested, question? What were we going to do with that boiler?
It would have been surplus for us to either sell or, hold for reuse at
Okay.
some other location.
Okay.
You'll recall that when we were installing it, we made sure that it could be reused if it needed to be reused. In the value engineering and the design, and, as we got the GMP finalized and got ready to build the project at Central Station, it was determined that the propane boiler actually will be paid. That's a more energy efficient boiler. It costs a little bit more, but it's going to pay back in a very short period of time, like 5 years. And so the thought was that it made more economic sense and environmental sense to use the propane, and it made this oil burning boiler surplus.
So the next, is there a question back there? So the next thing that I want to do, in his memo dated January 5, Peter expressed preference for a certain tax rate increase and provided us with projections about what future tax rates would look like based upon certain scenarios and assumptions. And I know Peter's got a position that he wants to express to us about how to deal with the tax rate question, and I'm gonna ask him to speak to that now. And then next what we'll do is, I think, go through all those questions, and then when those questions are decided, we'll go back to the question about what should the tax rate be. The only other thing I'm gonna note at this point is that some of these other issues, besides the first 3, which are the pellet boiler, the library, and the municipal center, energy saving measures, they each have certain impacts on the budget. And the work that we've done for the purposes of this memo and for this discussion tonight is our best approximation. After we do all the work tonight, Peter and Patrick and John will be going back over the budget in very fine detail. And it is possible that the numbers will shift a little bit based upon everything being accumulated in the final double check. So we're working off of these numbers being our best estimates of what the result will be, but please just be ready that there could be some minor differences when the final budget comes back to us next time based upon the real fine detail work that has to be done to finalize the budget. Peter, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to reinforce that with emphasis on minor. We wanted to make sure that if we came back a few digits different, that it wasn't startling to anybody, because there's actually some likelihood, especially once you've made decisions on these small dollar items, that there might be just a very small adjustment to be made there. But it wouldn't materially change the information that's in front of you, and wouldn't have material impact on the decisions that you'd make using this information. Regarding the use of fund balance, in the memorandum, we provided a graph to try to make more visual the phenomenon we've discussed numerous times now about how using fund balance in a particular year affects the, it impacts not only that particular year and that particular budget, but the budgets that follow. And it's particularly, as we look at the 5-year forecast, if you look at the bottom of page 2 in the graph that we provided in the memo, that impact in this particular cycle, and this will usually be true, it is true in this case as well, is particularly profound when you look at the first 2 years. The relationship between FY18 that you're deciding right now and FY19 that you'll be deciding a year from now. Relatively speaking, as you go out into FY20, 21, and 22, the lines become much more consistent. There is still some variability there, and that's based on how quickly the fund balance that's available goes to zero. So when there's still a small amount of fund balance that can be used in those out years, it gives a little bit more flexibility in the setting of the tax rate there, and a little bit more ability to maintain a consistent approach to that, so that the taxpayers don't get an inordinate benefit in a single year and then a really painful one the year after. That's the phenomenon that I'm particularly concerned could happen if we go too low with the tax rate that you're considering for tonight. And I want to reiterate that where we started this process, before we got into actually developing this budget, but back as a forecast in the spring, when the big decisions were being made regarding the police fire project, the scope of that project, and the funding for that project, and the approval of the FY17 budget, we were expecting that the tax increase that we'd be looking at right now would be 6.88 cents. We did feel we could do better than that. That was a forecast, but I frankly wouldn't have expected we could be doing as much better as we are as we sit here tonight sitting on 4.8. We were able to get that 6.88 down to 5.5 by the time we proposed a budget to you. There's the additional $100,000 or so of adjusting that's gone on since then. And we're in the fortunate situation where we start tonight looking at a 4.8 cent increase instead of 6.88. But as you make decisions tonight, I want to urge you to consider leaving the tax rate increase at 4.8 cents, leaving the amount to be collected in property taxes in this coming year at $14,421,047 for 2 reasons. One is the retention of some of that fund balance, as it's shown with the various choices that are presented to you here on the sheet for tonight, is not a matter of just saving it in general for, some level of comfort or whatever. It's not a broad concept. It's a very specific reason for doing that, which is so that we can continue to invest the fund balance, which, as we all know, is in we have a larger available fund balance right now than we normally have, to utilize that larger available fund balance as much as possible to invest in the capital needs of the town. This budget that's before you includes a very significant step in that direction. We're investing in intentionally in both capital projects and capital equipment that have been deferred and need to be addressed. And then unintentionally, but of necessity, the additional $550,000 that you may authorize, that we've recommended that you authorize to do in cash to buy the pumper rescue truck. I think we're making good decisions about where to put these funds, but it is a lot of fund balance in a short period of time going to that need. That's the right place to put it. If you were to utilize the additional fund balance that's available to go as low as you can in any of these scenarios with a tax rate, which could be as low as 2.4 cents in the scenario at the bottom of the page, or if you just deleted the pellet boiler but not the energy efficiency improvements here at the municipal center, it could go as low as 3 cents. If you seize that complete opportunity, you take the available fund balance down to zero, and we have lost our opportunity to sustain this reinvestment in capital over this next couple of years. We put the long-term plan together in a way that would boost our commitment to capital over a 3-year period, and then sustain it at $1 million a year after that using real-time taxes, using the annual recurring revenues. But in the first couple of years, we went 1.5, 1.3, 1.2, using the available fund balance so that we could kind of kickstart that catch-up work that we need to do in the capital program. So I urge you to consider keeping it at 4.8 and retaining the amount of fund balance that's shown. It still would be substantially less than what we had proposed in the long or forecast in the long-term plan. But the reason it would be so much less is because of purchasing the fire truck with cash, which I believe is a prudent decision. There would still be some that could be committed to capital work in future years. The second reason why I think you should consider doing that, and certainly if you decided not to be at the 4.8 level, to pick one of those intermediate ones, perhaps the 4.0, the 4 cent increase, is because of the balancing act between this year and next year. So this year, we're in a position where, for better or for worse, and I'm not suggesting that a tax rate increase of this magnitude is painless for people at all, but it is at least expected. We were in the situation where last spring, when the police fire facilities decisions were being made, we knew that there was going to be a larger than normal tax increase this year. So if you were to do the 4.8 this year, when people are expecting a larger than normal tax increase, you put yourself in a position where it's only 3.1 on the forecast for next year, subject to how we end up this year and all the work we're going to do together between now and next year to actually shape an FY19 budget. But the forecast for this moment is that it would be a 3.1 cent increase. So the 4.8 this year would put us in a position where it would be 3 cents next year. I think we could probably do better than that, but that would be speculation at this point. If, in the contrast, we go for the lowest possible tax rate that will fund the operating budget this year and don't preserve any of the fund balance, then in the scenario where you choose both the pellet boiler and the energy efficiency improvements at the municipal center to be deducted and go all the way down to a 2.4 cent increase this year, we set ourselves up for a 5.5 cent increase next year. And I'd like to suggest that when we're in a relatively more normal year, just going from one operating budget to another and not adding $400,000 worth of additional debt service like we are this year, that'll be a particularly unpalatable outcome for town meeting and for the voters to see a 5 cent increase, 5.5 cent increase in what would otherwise be considered a more normal budget year. So I think the prudent financial approach to this would be to be glad that we've been able to reduce the expected impact by 2 cents on the tax rate, and to proceed in a manner that does preserve a couple $100,000 worth of the fund balance to be invested in capital next year, and does make the projection of next year's FY19 property tax rate increase as low and manageable as possible.
Now, that is a position that needs to be substantially considered, but rather than having a additional discussion about that right now, what I want to do is go through each of those items, and then we'll come back to discussion of Peter's recommendation about the tax rate increase. When we've made all these decisions and we have a clearer view of how much money we actually need to spend next year, and everybody's conceptual views of that issue will be discussed. Dave?
Yeah, just to kind of clarify, because I think I thought I understood this, but now I have questions that I shouldn't have looked at it again. I should have just stuck with what I first thought. But what you're talking about here with the, this applies to all three scenarios. If we leave the pellet boiler, we leave the energy upgrades, and we do the, and we buy the pumper, we're looking at 5.5 cents.
No.
No,
We're looking at
4.8 cents.
Okay, so what changes as we go down is the future tax rate, not that 4.8. So
That's
if we
correct.
include all those things, we're at 4.8.
The 4.8 is where we are right now before you start making additional decisions this evening. And then what each of the other three sections show is how that 4.8 would be affected if you said yes to deleting one or the other or both of the items listed.
Right. And these are projected tax rates, and they include I'm not gonna look it up, but the two engines that we had, the large capital purchases for fire in the next 2 years, those numbers are out of it.
Let me make clear that the capital number is not reduced by either one of those two engines. We will avoid buying those engines. The decision to buy the pumper rescue will eliminate a pumper from next year's budget and a rescue from the year after. So there will be savings for those items. What I said last week, and I feel really strongly about and will reiterate now, is because we have so much work to do, I can't tell you exactly what will be in next year's capital plan. In part, that depends on things that begin to fail during this coming year. So some of it is going to be done in a really thoughtful, methodical manner, and some of it's going to be done in a more urgent manner. That's going to continue to be the case for the next several years until we get to a more steady state. But what I believe is we can't just take that couple $100,000 out or $400,000 out for a vehicle that we say, oh, well, now we won't need to buy that next year, and go right back to where we were with spending $500,000 instead of $1 million in capital, because that doesn't sustain our facilities or our fleet. We need to be investing consistently at $1 million or more to be doing all the
So
things that
there's
are necessary to
something
keep us up.
That really should be done sooner, that's now gonna just move up on the list.
That's exactly right. Something that might have been shown in, say, FY20 that now we get a chance to do in FY19 instead. So in the projections, both what's before you tonight and in the long-term plan, we're looking at an overall funding target for investing in capital as opposed to just a list of projects.
You're all set?
Yes.
Good. So, the first item for decision tonight is whether we want to leave in or take out the pellet boiler that was proposed. And very briefly, what I'll note is that the pellet boiler, as proposed in the energy audit, would have cost $215,000 both for the boiler and for related infrastructure. That infrastructure would include ductwork and housings and the like in order to get the energy that's being generated by that boiler from this building over to the library. And so the boiler is probably only a $50,000 or $75,000 item, but all the infrastructure to join these two buildings together as a single heating plant would bring that cost up to $215,000. And as noted, if we take the boiler out, the pellet boiler out of the budget, we're gonna need $10,000 to upfit the fire department, to move and upfit the fire department one-year-old boiler in order to suit the library's needs. So the first item for decision, as we move towards the final budget being prepared for us, is do we want to remove the joint pellet boiler for the library and the municipal center from the budget. And then as part of that overall effort, move the spare boiler from the fire department over to the library. We could just take a motion, or we can discuss it. Whatever you want to do.
I move to remove the boiler from the...
The pellet boiler.
The pellet boiler from the 2018 budget.
And to move the, and to include the funding to move the fire department one-year-old boiler
Yes.
to the library?
Yes.
Outfit it?
Accept that as a friendly amendment, yep.
Thank you. Anybody have any points they want to make about that from anybody on the board?
Yeah.
Dave?
Well, I see very clearly that this is really a good opportunity to save some money and to use the boiler that otherwise we probably would have to sell as a used boiler and probably wouldn't get much for, since it's a used boiler. But I have to say again that if you look at these savings over time, and after the pellet boiler pays for itself, we're still looking at well over $200,000 in savings over the life of that project. And that boiler from the fire department is not gonna save us any money. We can talk endlessly about what's gonna happen to the price of oil. I don't think there's many people that think it's gonna stay where it is, and certainly interest rates aren't gonna either. But it seems, I've said this a zillion times, I'll say it again, it seems short-sighted to me to not do these audit recommended projects that we did because we wanted to be looking at this, because this is what people are all over the planet are doing. And it's just prudent to do these things. And very much the way Peter's long-term capital plan and our forward-looking planning, we have this plan, and we're gonna save $500,000 next year and $500,000 the year after that because of these pumpers that we don't, these fire equipment that we don't have to buy. But we're still gonna keep with that plan. We're still gonna spend that $1 million because that's the smart thing to do. That's the right thing to do. That's the way to get us on a sustainable path. And the same is true with the energy savings. If we don't stick with it, if we don't do a little bit at a time, which is what we talked about several times, and why this recommendation and the other ones that we've had in this budget are here now, because these are the ones that have the best payback right now. If we don't do it, then we're just, as I said before, we're throwing money away. I think it's malfeasance to not take advantage of these. The other thing about, we haven't decided about what to do with this building, and it's put us in a bind. There's another item, I can't remember what it is right now, on here, because we don't know what we're doing with the building. There's another decision we have to make. And whether we sell it and move out, or whether we keep it, the value of the building is going to be increased significantly by having a pellet boiler in it, because of the savings that represents to anybody that's going to be taking it over. It also, if we stay here, it means we're going to be able to keep the rented or the leased property as well, and generate income from that won't have to be spent on energy. So it's just, it's a couple of $100,000. Oh my God, a couple $100,000, but it's going to pay for itself, and then save another couple of $100,000 over the 20 years. And as I said before, there's nothing else in our budget that we do. There's nothing that we buy that's actually an investment that we get a return on. Everything else is just money out the door. And we're getting services, and we're careful to get good ones and get them as efficiently as we can, but there's no return. It's not an investment. This is the only thing we have where we can invest, and it'll reduce our costs in the future. So it's just, to me, it's just short-sighted. It's worse than short-sighted, but I'll leave it at that.
Anybody else on the board want to say anything at this point? Is there anybody in attendance who wants to speak to the question whether the board should leave the pellet boiler in or take it out of the budget? Lester?
I just wanted to make a general comment on the 6 years that I was on the Energy Committee. We proposed that energy audits be done. And sort of year after year, they were put in the budget, and at the last minute, they were taken out. The reason was exactly the process you're going through right now, which was, hey, today we can save this much money by taking these measures out that aren't going to benefit us until the future. And at the same time, that's the reason why things are so tight right now, because decisions that were made 5, 10, 15 years ago mean that our costs are higher now than they would be if decisions were made to save money over the long term. And so, you know, it might be the right thing to not do this pellet boiler right now, but I would really encourage the board in general to be thinking about where are other places that investments can be made that will save money over the long term, because that's what's going to help the taxpayers over over the long term, and that's what we care about as residents, is what our tax rate is over the years.
Thank you, Lester. Anybody else want to speak to this issue? Franz?
Franz Reichsman from the Finance Committee. I don't have all the numbers that I think would be needed to really make some of these decisions, especially some of the finer tuning type decisions. But it sounds like, from what David was saying, and again, I don't know all the numbers involved, but if spending $200,000 now saves $200,000 over, say, a 20-year period, that's kind of a wash just from purely financial terms. You can look at other aspects as well.
That's on top of paying for the $200,000.
Okay, so you're
pays
saying
for
it would be
itself
like
and then saves another
200,000 now and then
it's
400,000
speculation.
coming back.
Well,
Hold up.
It's
Let's do this one at a
our
time.
whole budget is speculative.
Let's do this one at a time.
So,
Franz,
but
please.
what I'm really saying is having those numbers right before us is what's needed to make a decision like this. And I would add that there's another possible approach, which I don't want to advocate in the absence of more information, but putting the wood pellet boiler just in the library and not having the infrastructure costs associated with that would still save a lot of money, and that might provide the same long-term savings at a lower initial investment. So without wanting to advocate anything in the absence of complete information, what I'm really saying is that you would need that complete information to really make the decision.
Peter?
Thank you. We don't have information related to what a pellet boiler standalone in the library would cost, or what the return on that would be. That would be something that we'd need to look into if the board would like us to do that. There is a practical consideration related to that, which is the site that the library itself sits on is very tight. So the benefit of doing a combined boiler for the two facilities is that it would be housed here and then connected, the heat that would pass underground over to the library and serve that facility as well. So there'd be a logistical challenge we'd have to make sure we could get over, but we could explore that if the board would like us to do that. As far as the data about what came out of the energy audits and the forecasted payback periods and longer term savings, that material is in the backup materials for tonight's meeting, so it is before the board as they consider this matter.
Thank you.
We have a motion to remove the pellet boiler. Is there any further discussion right now? I want to thank Dave and the members of the Energy Committee for articulating the view relating to achieving long-term savings by converting to wood heat. There are points that are important for us to consider. There are countervailing considerations at this time, given that we have an 8-year-old boiler in the municipal center and an available 1-year-old boiler at the fire department. And although I'm in favor of achieving those energy savings based upon all the information we've got, including the information about what the savings would be, I'm going to vote in favor of that motion to remove the pellet boiler. Any further discussion? We have a motion to remove the pellet boiler that would jointly serve the library and the municipal center from the FY18 proposed budget, and to include money in that FY18 budget to move and upfit the fire department boiler to serve the Brooks Memorial Library. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
Say,
We have 4 in favor and 1 opposed to removing that joint pellet boiler from the budget. The next item has to do with energy saving measures at the library. In total, those energy saving measures cost $192,238. They involve an air handler, upgraded glass, and I believe roof insulation. It's on page 4 of the memo, and I also called up that information right now. Is there anybody at the table who's in favor of removing those library energy measures from the budget? Okay, so we're gonna skip over that. There's no motion. The library energy measures are gonna remain as is in the budget. The next item is the municipal center. There's $70,929 of energy saving measures for the municipal center in this year's capital budget. And Peter, please, will you say what they are? Or Patrick, one or the other?
Sure. They're ceiling plane insulation for $36,444, an air source heat pump for $18,810, and replacing heating system valves throughout the system for $15,675.
Is there a motion to remove $70,929 from the budget relating to municipal center energy cost-saving measures?
So moved.
All right, there's a motion to remove that from the budget. Is there any discussion from members of the board on that issue?
Can I just ask a question? These are things that we don't do now. Can we do them, say, next year? Or is this a do or die, have to do this right now?
No, they could be done next year.
Okay.
So besides Dave's position about the importance of energy saving measures as a whole, my position on this matter is that given the possibility of our remaining in the municipal center, I think that it would be a prudent budgeting decision from my perspective to include that $70,929 in the budget, recognizing that if we decide not to remain with the town offices in the building, we don't have to expend those funds, because that's a decision that has yet to be made. The only decision we'd be making now would be to budget for those matters in case we stay. So I would vote against personally this motion. Is there any further discussion from anybody on the board? Is there anybody in attendance who wants to speak to the motion to take $70,929 out of the budget for the municipal center energy saving measures? Michael.
Sorry, Michael Bosworth. Sir, I don't want to repeat what David said and what Lester said, but I just wanted to keep pointing out that, you know, the town has been regressing since 2010 as far as the amount of fuel it's been using in its buildings. We've made some savings for the streetlights, but as far as the fuels, we've been using more. It's costing the town more. And the benefit of the audits is that now we have information that allows us to start reversing that trend. And if we just ignore those audits, I think that's, to me, that's really the wrong way to go, both from a financial point of view and also from, you know, what's good as far as, you know, using fewer fossil fuels. So it's really, you have the opportunity now that it hasn't been there for a while, based on good information. So I'm certainly in favor of saving these energy saving measures in the budget. So.
Thank you, Michael. Anybody else on the board? All right, we have a motion to remove $70,929 from the proposed FY18 budget relating to municipal center energy measures. All those in favor of making that cut to the proposed budget, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Nay. All right, so that fails, and we're gonna leave that 7929 in the budget at this time. So Peter, if you could please tell us what Carol's response was to Mr. DeGray's inquiry about extending or changing the pool hours, and what the proposed costs would be.
Certainly. The Select Board has a memorandum dated January 5th from Carol Lalott, Recreation and Parks Director. In the backup materials for this evening, it's a 2-page memo. It's about in the middle of your budget materials for this evening. And the outcome of her analysis regarding Living Memorial Park was that as we get into mid-August, the evening participation in the pool, the evening swimming activity at the pool goes way down. We don't see very many people coming after 5 o'clock, but there are still kids coming in the afternoon. And so her suggestion in response to the expressed desire to have one more week of the pool being open was to accomplish that at minimum additional expense by reducing that one additional week and what is currently the final week, which is the second week of August. Reduce so that those final 2 weeks of the summer, the hours of the pool would be just from 1 to 4 p.m. and the pool would not be open from 4 to 8 p.m. If you find that an acceptable balancing of the interests here to gain the additional week, but in the most cost-effective manner, the additional cost to the town's budget would be $1,750. And the reason that that would be so small is it wouldn't increase our staffing expenses at all, and our staffing expenses are the greatest cost for the operation of the pool. The only additional cost would be for some electric costs and the chemicals, and very little water and sewer related expense.
So what's this 5180 down at the bottom?
That is if you were to simply add another week at the regular hours.
Okay.
Oh,
Then, because of the additional staffing cost on top of the other costs, it would be $5,180 to add a week.
Gotcha.
But staff's recommendation is to add the week, reduce the hours of those final 2 weeks, and add $1,750 to the budget.
So we're looking for a motion to, potentially, we're looking for a motion to modify the pool hours to extend the operation by a week as proposed by Ms. Lalott, and increase the pool expenses by $1,750.
so moved.
We have a motion to extend the pool for a week, but narrow its hours for that week and the week before, adding $1,750 to the budget. Is there any discussion from anybody on board on that point? Is there anybody in attendance who's got anything to say about that? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed or abstaining? That carries 5-0. The next of our list of decision items is relating to an inquiry we had about use of the Creamery Bridge. Peter, would you please address that one?
Sure. So the question was raised of what it would cost to make the bridge functional as a venue for people to hold weddings or other gatherings. And that's on the second page of this same memorandum we're just looking at. There is both an upgrade cost and an operating cost because the additional electricity, as well as the annual, there would have to be a fire sprinkler system installed, so there'd be an annual fire inspection, sprinkler system inspection. So the operating costs that would go on from year to year are estimated at $1,380, beginning for the first year of operation and going from there. And there's an estimated $6,800 cost to upgrade the facility. That could probably be brought in at a slightly lower figure. The $5,000 estimate, we believe that the actual electrical cost would be somewhat less than that, but it'll be between $4,000 and $5,000. So between $6,000 and $7,000 would be the cost of the upgrade if you did choose to proceed with the decking improvements, the electrical work, and installation of signage to create a safe gathering place at the bridge. Staff does not have a recommendation on this item. We just provide the information that you requested, and would be happy to proceed with the project if it's the select board's pleasure. If you do that, then we would have a recommendation regarding the operation of it, which is just to add it as an additional venue. So people have to take out a permit to use Plenty Park, and they have to take out a permit to use the Common. If you did decide that we were going to invest this $7,000 in upgrading the bridge and having it be a gathering place, then we would plan to operate a permit system for the use of it in the same manner as those other facilities.
Yeah, there was a question about, somewhere along the line, a question about parking. And I just want to point out that the farmer's market decided shortly after they purchased that property and put in that semi-permeable pavement, and made that parking area down there to leave it open, to not chain it between Saturday markets, so that the soccer people or swim people or anybody that wanted to have a party on the bridge could use it. So that parking is available. It's not municipal, but it is available.
Thank you.
Anybody else on the board have any comments?
Oh, I think Dick does first.
Dick?
Yeah, I brought this forward. Multiple people have talked to me about why we don't use this as a venue. One thing that you did say, Peter, you mentioned sprinkler system. It does have a dry sprinkler system there already, correct? So there wouldn't be an expense for that. I don't know if you mentioned an expense for sprinkler, but I did hear you mention that. And one of the things that there isn't here is a revenue offset, because I do believe that people would rent it. It is the most photographed building in our community. It draws people to the community, and, you know, it's one of those, sometimes you have to spend a little money to make a little money. And I truly believe it's an asset in our community that would be utilized, and I certainly know there actually was a picture, I mentioned this at a meeting I was at the other day, of Country Magazine's December, January issue, Winter in Vermont, and on the lead of the article was a picture of the Creamery Bridge all lit up. So it is really popular. I hope that my fellow board members support this, because I do think that moving forward, it certainly would generate revenue, but again, there is obviously a little bit of expense up front. But I think it would be a great place for people who want to hold a wedding, whatever. That's just a great, great spot. So that's all I'll say.
Anybody else on the board?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. And I think in theory, it's a good idea, but, and I don't want this to sound negative towards anybody, Plenty Park is right downtown. Everybody walks by it all the time. Yet after events, that park doesn't look so good. And I worry about doing events at a place that, you know, doesn't have constant traffic, and how it's going to end up at the end. You know, I worry about that. So that's why I'm going to vote no, because I mean, I watch what happens at Plenty Park, and everybody can see that space, and it doesn't look so great. So I just worry about what's going to happen to the bridge when it's not a well-traveled path. That's my concern.
Well, I would say that when people rent our facilities, whether they're renting the place up on top of the hill, there's a cleanup fee. They're responsible for cleaning up the area. There's people that go in the park every day that they're not, all of our parks, that they don't police themselves. There's, you know, and I do see trash on the bridge when I'm up there. So the reality is, regardless of what we do, there might be some trash. So I would hope that that might sway you to say, you know, that's just what happens today. That not everybody's as clean as they should be, but that would be part of the contract, that the facility is cleaned up, and if not, then they get charged a fee for cleaning it up.
Any other comments from anybody on the board or anything else? Yes?
Yeah, no, Dick, while I agree in principle on the idea about it, I worry a little bit about the wear and tear on the bridge itself. You know, you start getting 100 people in there or whatever, you know, and I know it probably wouldn't happen that often, but I just wonder about the wear and tear and the maintenance of it in the long run. It's a beautiful bridge, and it is photographed a lot. And I just think maybe we should leave it at that, as a nice, beautiful bridge, and not have the wear and tear that would be associated with events on it. You know, because I don't know what the life expectancy of that bridge is at this point. And I don't know if that extra, I mean, it was closed down for a reason. Because it couldn't handle the weight anymore, and it couldn't handle the traffic. So, I just like Creamery Bridge the way it is. So, you know, and I don't want to put a damper on it, but that's just my feelings on the bridge.
Anybody else on the board? Is there anybody in attendance who wants to speak to the potential expenditure to upgrade the Creamery Bridge for events? Hearing none. We have motion. Do we already?
So,
If not,
There's
so
no-
moved.
no, I don't.
Right, so-
I move that we spend $8,180 to convert the Creamery Bridge into a events venue.
Any further discussion? On the motion to add $8,100 to the budget to, for use of the Creamery Bridge. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
That fails 2-3. The next item is the proposed fire cuts. So I think what we've learned very explicitly is that when the need to buy the pumper rescue first arose, or to replace the pumper first arose, the administration and the fire department identified $65,000 in potential cuts, or some amount in potential cuts, to try to offset the cost of financing that purchase over 10 years. But they think that making those cuts would be a bad idea. So if anybody wants to make a motion to adopt any of those cuts, primarily it's not buying the thermal imaging camera and not buying the tracking software, this would be a good time to do it.
Well, can I just express some frustration? I just don't get why 1 minute we have to cut it and it's okay, and then the next minute, oh my God, we have to have it. I get really frustrated
I can explain that.
by this.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
So, we didn't have to cut it, but I didn't think it was responsible to show up at our second budget meeting and say, we got this $550,000 expense. Now, we can't borrow for it, but that's still gonna be a $65,000 additional expense. So, Select Board, please just increase the budget by that amount. So we looked hard at what we were asking for, and very reluctantly, I said so that night, and I've said so multiple times since then, it wasn't that these are things that we had asked for frivolously. It was just that, on balance, the truck that failed inspection meant we had an emergency of great magnitude, $550,000, that we needed to address to protect the community. And so it felt like the responsible way to approach that, to come to you and say, if you agree and we're going to proceed with this, it's going to have a $65,000. If we had borrowed the money, we actually still might, you're going to make that decision this evening. But if we borrow the money for that, it's going to have a $65,000 impact to the operating budget. So we have found the following ways in which we could remove $65,000 from what we otherwise were proposing to you. We've got thermal imaging cameras that are highly a technologically advanced piece of equipment that's essential to the effective functioning of the fire department, that are over a decade old. And we've got one scheduled to be replaced this year and one scheduled to be replaced next year. If the circumstances were such that we simply couldn't afford the $14,000 and we needed to postpone that and get one next year and one the year after, you live with realities like that in life. But the reason that we would suggest to you now that these items not be cut is that they were really a last resort, patch it together kind of response to the emergency that had occurred with the truck. And since then, we've had discussion on multiple evenings about the fortunate situation that we're in with the amount of fund balance that we have, and the you know, good financial opportunity it presents to buy this vehicle with cash. So if we buy the vehicle with cash from the fund balance, then the operating budget can afford to buy these items that we otherwise would have lived without. And in the first instance, we recommended them to you because we believe they are needed and that this is an appropriate year to buy them, and we still believe that.
Dave?
Two questions. One is, I know within the last 3 years, because I was on the board when it happened, we approved a new thermal imaging camera. And I was surprised at the cost. It was less than this, but I was surprised at the cost because the ones that they use to thermal image houses to find heat leaks are nowhere near this cost. So I'm assuming it's a way more effective machine. But we do have one that's not 10 years old. We have one that's just a couple years old. And the other thing is, if we decide to, this is a speculative question, so you don't have to answer it. But if we decide that we want to go with 3.5 cents and everybody's got to cut stuff, then this is going to be gone, right?
If you decided that 2.5 cents is your goal, we've got a lot of other conversation to have around other items in this budget. I would really strongly urge that you not view these couple of things as the easy pickings. If what you're saying as a group, if you do come to the conclusion as a group that we need to work harder and find more savings, then I think we've got an additional task that's a much broader task that we should conduct together.
John?
Chief, weren't we up for grants or something on the thermal imaging cameras at one point? And I don't know where we stand on that. I could have sworn that I remember that. But
I can't remember, John. I'm sure we've put in for grants for
Right.
the cameras, but it hasn't been recently.
it hasn't.
It hasn't been recently. One of the things that may help, the camera that is in the budget to replace this year is pre-2000 vintage, and the one for next year is a 2000 model. They're very essential to our operations. They certainly help search and rescue and finding fire.
Oh, no, I totally agree with that.
You know, much better. And I think to Kate's comment, I didn't give this stuff up, if you will, give it up easily. It was certainly a conversation that we had with the town manager. And what we looked at first was the stuff that was added to the budget, which was the camera and the software to bring it back to last year's level. We're just trying to advance our operations and efficiency.
Dick? John, your question's been answered?
Oh, yeah, yep.
Dick?
Well, the imager is $14,000.
Correct.
That's in your memo. The $40,000, there was $40,000 for the sprinkler. We hope that that's going to change anyway.
And that has,
That
we
has
have achieved
happened.
those
Okay.
savings to
And
the
so-
capital
so-
fund.
So the outstanding item for me here is the operating budget, reduced that by 11,000, and it says 8,500 from office supply line item and deferring purchase of operating management software by 2,500. So, to me, that's the item.
The software is actually the $8,500 item. We may not have phrased that well in what we sent to you, but you're right about the 11.5 being the total amount for the operating budget, and 8,500 of that is in a software purchase that will improve both the administrative functioning of the department and better oversight of the operations of the fire department, which is very operations heavy and very light administratively. So again, our staff recommendation would be that it was only very reluctantly and as a last resort that we brought these to you. We don't recommend that you approve any of them at this point.
Could you say that one more time? So staff recommends that.
We didn't look at these as something that we shouldn't do or don't need to do
Right.
or had changed our minds about. just the truck emergency arose, and so
Right.
we went looking for
Right.
$65,000
Right.
worth of savings, even if it was painful.
Right.
So as we sit here today on the, I believe, just about to make a decision about the truck that is likely to be a purchase with cash. Even if you don't decide to do that, if you decide to split that somehow and have some amount of that be, be debt service cost rather than fund balance cost, the impact to the tax rate based on the cuts that you've already identified, that we've already identified together, is that it's gone down substantially since it was first proposed. So,
Right.
so remember that the circumstance when I first brought the potential cuts to you was we had on November 1st proposed a budget at a certain amount with a 5.5 cent tax increase. And literally within the first week, we encountered this situation, and at the very next budget meeting, I had to come to you and say, we've got this $550,000 need.
Right.
And so we had scrambled in the meantime, because nothing else had been changed in this budget, to say to you, in order to be able to afford this truck that we need urgently, we could make the following cuts, but not because those items aren't needed for the operation of the
I
department.
guess where I'm confused is we could. They weren't part of the budget. They were, as you handed me in this memo, saying if you decide to do this with debt service, here are some areas where we will find $65,000. So to me, it's not, we're not putting these back in. To me, they're still there.
That's exactly right. They are still there,
They're still
and
there,
staff's
so they don't need
recommendation
my
is that you
approval.
leave them there.
They don't need our approval to put something that was never removed in the first place.
And that's
That's
why
right.
really the question right now is, following this discussion, I'm gonna say, is there a motion to cut essentially $25,000 from the fire department budget and not buy the heat camera and not buy the software and cut, an additional $2,000? Is there a motion to do that?
No.
No. Okay, so.
Thank you.
We're not doing this proposed fire cuts.
That was a long
All
way
right.
around.
Well, needed to be decided.
Well, I
So-
was confused, I got confused.
Needed was on the table. Next item is the energy coordinator position. So, we discussed this at some length last week. We've put a series of alternatives on the table about how to be dealing with energy efficiency measures. And the question is whether we're going to put an item in the budget this year for the energy coordinator position. In the past, it's only made its way into the warning because Paul came to us and asked us to include it.
I sort of feel like if we don't have a plan, I
I
don't want
like
to just
to- yeah,
put, I don't want to put money in, and that doesn't mean
No.
I'm not for energy efficiency, because I am, but I'd rather have some kind of plan.
And-
That's my
And
biggest concern.
that's why I love the recommendation that Peter came up with. I really like it, because I was all in favor of just throwing $10,000 in and let's keep going, but it makes sense to have a longer range plan on that. And I like how you wrote that up, and I was in agreement after I read it.
So Peter, if you would then talk about your, yeah, Dave, you go first.
In the past, this has been a separate article
It is good.
in the warning.
Yeah.
Well, then I would move that we have a $10,000 separate article for town coordinator on the warning and let the town decide.
Okay. And Peter, would you, unless Dick's ready to go, Peter, if you would,
Sure.
just speak to what your recommendation was.
Sure.
Set forth in what John just spoke about.
It's essentially as Kate and John described it, that because we are in transition with this position and don't have a specific plan for how we intend to move forward, I thought for the purposes of this budget, it would be best to eliminate the $10,000. It has been an unusual situation with the donation to a nonprofit that funded a part-time position that assisted with this work. We've been through on prior evenings about the fact how different this is from other committee work in the town, and this wasn't really a staff position, but it certainly also was more than just a volunteer position, unusual kind of hybrid. So in order that the select board can have time to look at this matter further, get input from the Energy Committee, get input from the staff, decide how to proceed, I thought eliminating it from the FY18 budget, developing a plan in the months ahead for how to approach the energy coordinator position and the support for the Energy Committee's work, and then to implement that plan. That, in the discussion you had a week ago, the options ranged from a volunteer position that would have no cost to the town to actually maybe funding a sustainability officer that would be a full-time staff position. So in the discussion around this issue, it isn't necessarily that it would end up being going to the volunteer side of that spectrum. It might be that the town actually a year from now would be looking to invest more in this function. But we certainly have work to do and things to consider before you make that decision. And so my thought was make a plan in the months ahead, implement that plan in FY19 budget, and for FY18 capture the $10,000 of savings.
Dave?
Yeah. The problem with that is that that means that, well, first off, we've got 6 months to develop a plan. And I'm sure the Energy Committee will be busily doing that. And 6 months to talk about, do we want to make it larger? Do we want to make it sustainability? Do we want to combine it with an economic development position? I mean, there are all kinds of things that we could look at in the months going forward. But if we don't allow the town to make the decision about whether they want to do this in an expedited way or whether they want to wait a year and a half to see anything come of it, if we're going to wait, it's going to be a year and a half until anything can happen. And I just think that there's way too much initiative there and energy that could be lost. The Energy Committee is going to have a year and a half of just kind of, well, not having the leadership and the staff support that they need that's allowed them to get the work done that they've gotten done in the past. So it's not just a few months, it's a year and a half, because there's nothing in place now, and there will be nothing in place for another year if we don't put it in the 18 budget. So rather than us decide, let's let the town decide what they want to do with this measure.
I just want to clarify one part of what we're recommending. I think your point's well taken. It's the alternative viewpoint here is to put funding in of some amount that would position the town to be able to implement something that could be determined in the future. So the impact of the recommendation that staff is offering would be that there wouldn't be funding available for this support function until a year and a half goes by. You're exactly right about that. That doesn't mean that the position would sit vacant for a year and a half. So it could be a volunteer position, or it could be provided for by some other means, like nonprofit support or something, some other method during that intervening time. The focus on this matter at this time is strictly whether you want to put in, as you have been putting in, as the town has been putting in for years, $10,000 as a contribution towards this staffing effort. It's the funding that we're talking about tonight rather than the actual support service that's provided by a coordinator.
Dave, and I don't know if I'm correct on this, but can't town meeting reps put it in anyways as a motion, right?
Not unless you put it on as a warning item in front of them.
Yeah, they can't specifically say we want 10,000 for this.
They can't.
They can
They
say
can't line item up.
10,000 and then
They
we have
can
to.
say, we want to add
Yeah.
10,000. They can give you direction, but you don't have to do
Right.
That's right.
what the
Right, but
direction is.
they can do that at
Town meeting.
town meeting.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes,
Give $10,000 and say, we think you should
that's right,
spend it
and we
for.
think, right, so I mean,
they
it can
can
be
do
brought up.
Oh, yeah, I mean, anything can, but
Right.
typically, if we want something to, I mean, this has gone before, it's always been there, do you want to approve it or not? And I just want, let's do what we've always done, and, so that the work can continue without an 18-month interruption.
Anybody else on the board? Dick?
I feel bad for David because he's supported several of my initiatives and I've not really supported a lot of his. Through the years, I've supported Paul, and Paul's gone. The reality is the person who created the position and did all the work is gone. And he's been gone for several months and no one has actually come forward and said, I would like to take that over and this is my proposal. And could you fund me as the coordinator? So therefore, I'm leaning more to what Peter is talking about. And part and parcel is, we've had several issues before us here in this budget cycle, which are energy efficient issues, and we have not supported them. And for whatever reason I have chosen, or Kate, or John, and Dave is one way on one vote and one way on another vote. But the reality is, you know, if we're going to look at an energy coordinator as being part of staff, there's got to be commitment from the people serving on the board to say, these are good ideas, and vote to support them, as David has been advocating for. To just fund a position because it feels good and we should do it because it's energy efficiency, and then not follow through by supporting the stuff that was proposed at the transportation center, which I voted against, and think spending $43,000 on quilts for the windows was a good expenditure. But hey, and some other things, at least at this point, because one, for here, the municipal center, I'm not sure if we're gonna be here. So putting $70,000 to something where we might not be here, and now the town has it as sort of a slush fund, is not something that I wanna support. But at the end of the day, with no plan in front, and just say, we're gonna put $10,000 up there and we'll come up with it, what if the board doesn't support that going forward? And you've got $10,000. I'd rather have something coming forward with the initiative of the good people serving on the Energy Efficiency Committee and the town manager, and come back with a solid proposal to say, bingo. And even David mentioned that maybe this is a larger role than a $10,000 position at our last meeting. And maybe it is. But to do it willy-nilly like this, to say, okay, we want to continue putting $10,000 there, at this point, you know, Paul is gone, and it's too bad there's no one here to walk right into those shoes, because they didn't. Then I think that we have to look at this in a totally different manner. So, I'm sorry, partner, but I'm not going to vote for your.
No, they're not easy choices. It's not cut and dried in any case.
No,
And there are reasons to do exactly what.
it's not personal.
Anybody in attendance want to speak to this issue? Michael?
Just, there has been some interest expressed in this position. I've been trying to hold off and say, I think we really want the select board to sort of make a decision about going forward. Is this going to, money come from the town to support it or not, or is this just going to be a volunteer position? I think that, to me, that had to get clarified. And there is even a little bit of money left in the fiscal year 17 that was to go to Paul. Also, I think if this money is voted, I personally wouldn't be in favor of just filling it with anybody. I think we'd want somebody we'd had confidence in that could fill the shoes that, Paul so ably filled. So I just also want to point that out. So, having time to think it through at length and come up with maybe a more, I'm not sure what we would come up with over 18 months or less. That sounds enticing because I think that's a logical thing to do, but then again, we'd have to wait 18 months to have anything. So I'm certainly in favor of voting the $10,000 of support from the town for this for next fiscal year.
Thank you, Mr. Bosworth. Any further? Lester?
Lester Humphreys, Brattleboro. I also want to kind of say, even though some things have gotten voted down, I would say in general, many things that Paul worked on have gone forward, and some of those things weren't budget items. He got grants to replace lights in the transportation center, for example, street light initiative. While there was work on his part, there was no cost to the town, and select board, faced with savings and no cost, definitely move forward on those items. So having a energy coordinator that can move forward with grants, funding, initiatives to do things in addition to things that cost money, that sometimes get voted down, I think would be really valuable. And the data shows that the savings, we're over $100,000 a year in savings from the initiatives that Paul and the Energy Committee were working on, are effective. So I think we need to look broader than that. And then the other thing is that I think there are also opportunities for looking at funding, low-interest loans, and stuff like that that have not been realized, that somebody really good could look at, and those decisions to save money with projects that have funding attached to them could be more palatable to the board going forward. So I think there's lots of opportunities going forward.
I hope that if this is voted down, that the board and the administration in the coming months really focus on finding ways to ensure that the town is capturing savings from energy efficiency in the most effective way possible, because it's not really clear to me that that's been happening in the recent past. Paul did good work, but it's really not clear to me globally that we've captured what's possible to be captured in the most effective way, and I think that that's a value to be aspired to. Franz?
Paul's been gone for a few months now. It would mean that he was only here for a few months in the fiscal year. I wonder what happens to the funding for this fiscal year if it's not being expended on Paul's salary now.
Winds up in fund balance, and if there's a real core decision that the board makes probably over a period of time, is always possible that money can wind up getting reallocated within a budget
Especially
as
in
well,
that
if something
amount.
really gels. Any further discussion about the energy coordinator position? There's a motion to put an article on town meeting warning to spend $10,000 for energy coordinator position.
I know.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
That fails 1-4. Next item is the,
Before you do that, there is $10,000 in the budget as the budget stands today. So it's always gone forward as there's been money in the budget for the $10,000 and a separate town meeting article. So
I move to strip that 10K out of the budget relating to the energy coordinator position. Is there further discussion about that? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
No.
That carries 4-1.
thank you.
I have triple, I've been, one time in 4 years, I've been all by myself, and I've done it 3 times for it's a new record.
Welcome to my boat.
Yeah,
You're being beat on down there, buddy.
yeah, but wait a few months and we'll see what happens.
So the pump and rescue, I make a motion that we spend $550,000 out of our fund balance to purchase a pump and rescue truck as recommended by the town manager and the fire department. Is there any further discussion about that? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstaining? That carries 5-0. So that finishes all the individual decisions that needed to be made. So now we're in scenario 2 in the FY18 budget memo. There are some other changes that I think will impact the very, very bottom line based upon some of the decisions we made, and I'm not sure exactly where the exact penny is going to get to. But at the current time, if we agreed on a 3-cent tax increase based upon the 10 decisions we just made, we would essentially leave no fund balance above the 10% guideline.
Yep, they got their truck, they're out of here.
If we go the 4.8 cent increase that was originally
recommended, we would leave almost $210,000 behind in the fund balance for next year. And so really, the question is, what is the board's pleasure between that 3 cents and the 4.8 cents?
Now, can I ask a question based on what Peter said? You were worried that if we didn't do the 4.8, you know, in the subsequent years, you know, it's going to shoot up.
Right.
But if you look at, if we do 4 cents, it's going to go 3.9 cents in FY19. So that's basically the same.
You could do that, that's right.
Yeah.
There'd be, if you chose that as a middle ground option, there'd be a 4-cent increase this
Yeah.
year and a 3.9-cent increase next
Right.
year. Again, we've got work to do in the next 12 months to try to beat that number. If we had a big bad surprise, we might do even worse than that, but that would be a way to level the 2 years out
Right.
with each other.
Right, so the one point I want to make about this is that I consider the projections for next year to be our best good faith efforts to say what the budget's going to look like next year. But every year we wind up squeezing the budget, you know, like a dish rag, and squeezing everything out of it. And I'm not convinced, based upon 6 years worth of budgeting that I've been on the board now, that you're really guaranteeing a 3.9 cent increase next year if you agree to a 4 cent increase this year.
Right.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
I don't
Right.
think that at
Right.
all.
And so, at this point, I am leaning towards, right, there may be extra surplus, that's the way it's been for many years. We're leaving over some surplus. Last week I came in and said I'd like a 3 cent increase. But now I'm leaning more to something in between the 3 and the 4.8, you know, 3.8, 3.7, 3.6, 3 3/4, something in that range, which then would leave between $75,000 and $100,000 in fund balance, which can then be used next year for whatever purpose. So that's sort of where I'm coming to now. Dick?
I'm not. I'm at 3%, and
3 cents or 3%?
or 3 cents. Excuse me.
You changed your mind.
And you know, I'm looking at what we did here, and if that got us down to the 3 cents, that's what I'm in favor of. I look at this 10% surplus number, and the reality is that number exponentially grows every year as the budget grows. And back in 2006, we were in debt.
Right.
We were in debt. We didn't have a dime. And look at us now. We got a pocket full of cash. And I have to tell you that I think it's one of the major problems that we have is that we have all this debt. And we were sitting at, and so we have all these bills, and we're sitting on all this cash. We're sitting on a big pile of cash. So Peter, when you come down to my store and you got that $50 bill in your pocket, and you go, no, I think I want to keep it there because it feels good in my pocket, and you hand me the credit card. That's what people do. They don't want to spend cash. And so for me, that 10% number, if we need to dip down into it, and I'm a big fan of using the capital money to get something for it. So not just going to lower our taxes. So if next year you have to use it more of that, whatever that 10% figure is, if I was sitting on the board, I'd say, well, if I only got $800,000 in the bank or $500,000 in the bank, I'm okay with that. And so this reality is that the board has been locked into this number when I think it's been detrimental to the board because we think that we have to have the savings. We can go out and borrow money. We don't have to have that much money sitting in the bank. And it is a number that when I supported it, I wasn't really in favor of it, but I said, okay, because doesn't lock in any board, so this board can say, well, you know, we only want 8%, or we only want 6% there. So for me, I think we have to do what we can to give the lowest tax rate to the community and move forward, because as David said, I've been on enough budgets to know that there's no guarantee on anything there is moving forward. And so I support the 3-cent increase.
Chuck? Yeah, can I shoot?
I've been on a lot of budgets, and I've never, the next year, following the budget that we've just agonized over, I've never, like Dick says, I've never seen our slush fund go down. I've always seen it, and it's not a slush fund, it's whatever, however you want to, surplus, undesignated, this, that, whatever you want to call it. I've never seen it go down. I do have to say that I've changed my mind a little bit between the Finance Committee and Peter about not dipping into that too much, because it does have an effect on the next year and the next year after that. But my whole purpose on getting on the board was to eliminate as much tax burden on the people as possible. And I've said that from day one. I'm not a mathematician, I'm not a finance guru, but I just know that the taxes in this town are high. And so for me, I just want to get the tax rate as low as possible. And how we get there, and so now I'm on the fence, Dick, with what you said about, that 10% is just a moving target, and it can go any which way. But, so that's where my dilemma is. I would love to dip into that and say, geez, let's have a 0% increase, but I don't think that's, from what now I understand, I don't think that's good financial planning for the future. So
But I'm not advocating
No.
for taking more money this year and putting it towards the budget. We've made cuts to get us down to where we are. You could say, okay, we'll take more fund balance, and I know that you're gonna have to make that up next year. But next year, when you're sitting here as a board member, and you and Kate will be here for sure, you go, okay, well, we've got these capital items, so we're gonna dip down to 9%. You get the board to say, we're gonna go to 9 or 8% fund balance instead of 10%, and use some of this money to offset the tax revenue. So, you've got this pile of money over here to make you feel good, when in reality, you
Right.
should be using it for capital in the years out if you feel that you need to.
But I'm wondering what changed your mind from last week to this week, because last week, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought you said 5 cents, you were happy with that.
He definitely did.
I did.
Okay,
I did.
so I'm
But
just
you were
wondering.
saying with the budget, I was happy with what Peter did. But we've made cuts here,
Yeah,
okay?
so I was just
And
wondering what
so-
changed in between your thinking then and your thinking tonight. I was just trying to grasp
I was
that. because-
okay with what Peter did.
Yeah,
And so I'm going, okay, and I'm okay with the cuts that we've made. I'm not okay with taking more fund balance, because I don't think I've never thought that was the prudent thing to do.
Right.
Since I've been involved as a town meeting member and then as an
Right.
elected official. But I'm okay here with this as it sits. And I don't know, we had the fire truck come up as if the fire truck didn't come up, this is a moot conversation, isn't it?
oh.
I mean, the
absolutely.
reality is.
That's
and so there-
550,000.
That's right. So the reality is, we have no idea what's gonna happen. We don't know what's gonna happen tomorrow.
I know,
So-
but the point I was trying to make is that I've done six or seven budgets, and I've never seen where the next year, all of a sudden, we started doing, and we went, oh my God, we really under budgeted like crazy. I've never seen us under budget the next year.
Where you come out
Where you
in
come
it
out
with a deficit.
lower, with a deficit. I
You know
haven't
what,
seen
John?
it.
Back when I first got on the board, I don't believe that there was as much oversight as there was starting
absolutely.
back then. And I think once we had the deficit, boards.
That was an eye-opener.
Boards started paying
Right.
more attention. It wasn't one person that
No.
did it. Boards started paying more attention. there was more pressure put on the department heads and the town manager to say, we need to stay within budget. For years, the town had overexpended its budget, if you go and look at the reports, and the only thing that saved them, that there was surplus revenue that came in, so you didn't have a deficit. So the revenues offset the over expenditures in the line item. Well, what's been going on the last 8 or 9 years is that we are not exceeding our expenditures and our revenues are exceeding expectation. Plus, we have $2 million in the bank. It's plain and simple. So,
I want to give a little bit of alternate perspective on this at this point. When I sat with Peter this morning trying to organize how we were going to move forward today, I tried to get a handle on just what capital money we're investing in. How much money are we paying for infrastructure in next year's budget? And so I just want to put that on the table so we're clear. Next year's expenditures include $1,043,000 almost in payback for the police fire project. So when we talk about reinvestment in infrastructure, we're starting that there was this major commitment by the town to the police fire infrastructure. We got $1 million and $1,043,000 almost that we got to invest. We're then spending $550,000 planning next year for the pumper rescue. There's $925,000 in capital budget projects, and I have them all listed here. The biggest ones being life safety, paving, windows and the lot at Gibson Aiken Center, a whole series of $50,000 increased investment in sidewalk, and then $445,000 additional money in equipment capital, including body cameras, ballistic vests, the thermal imaging cameras, and then the dump truck and the sweeper. So that's $3 million in infrastructure. That's part of the entirety of the $17 million that's being spent. So that's a real substantial investment in infrastructure that really, I think, shows good faith commitment by the board to put us on track.
More than we've done before.
Exponentially more.
More than
But
we've done, right.
I would note that what Peter points out in this memo here is that a 3.5-cent tax increase just covers the increased debt service on the police fire. That's what I understand.
That's correct.
And so if we go with a tax increase that's lower than 3.5 cents,
Oh, right.
then we are actually funding the police fire by taking more out of the surplus and through essentially cuts in the operating.
Yes, yes.
And so it seems to me that at the very least, the bottom line should be that the 3.5-cent tax increase to cover the increased cost of the borrowing for the police fire this year is a prudent step. And then we're taking all the fund balance that's available and we're making an increased investment in infrastructure and we're keeping our operations the same. So rather than the 3-cent increase, I'm in favor of the 3.5. And that's not where I was last week. I've gone up, but based upon everything we've done and Peter pointing out that that's the increased money for the debt service from the police fire, I'm in favor of 3.5-cent increase.
John, are you going to scold David for
Changing my mind. I already got a flip-flop,
I
pointer
didn't scold
earlier.
you. I just pointed out something that I heard, that's all.
That he was open-minded and listened
That's
to
right.
evidence and changed his mind,
Changed his
learned
mind.
and
Yes.
changed his mind.
We're all growing.
Other comments that people have to make?
Yeah.
Dave?
Well, I'm not sure, I usually put little numbers, so I do things in order, but I'm not sure in what order here. Well, first thing is that when the police fire bond was passed, and at least for me, when I saw the almost 7 cents increase, I just looked and said, well, we gotta do this, we're gonna have to find some savings, because we're not gonna ever go to 7-cent tax increase. So, not to say that we didn't, that that's not real money, but it was always understood that there was gonna have to be belt tightening other places to be able to afford that. And because we're doing, our infrastructure strategy includes the upgrading and modernization and making usable our police and fire facilities, and a significant investment in capital to make up for previous lack of investment, but also, again, to get to a sustainable and sort of regular budget expectation around those infrastructure payments. But those are two very large strategies that we're going forward with at the same time. And that's a lot of pressure on a tax rate. And I think that, I don't think we can put it all into the tax rate. I don't think we can I don't want to go to 4.8. I was thinking 3 sounded about as high as I wanted to go, but I mean, what Dave said makes sense. And I also we have to support Peter's plan, the long-term financial plan, the long-term capital plan. I mean, to say, yeah, put all this together for us, spend the whole year doing all this, explain to us why it's really important, and then just blow it off and say, well, actually, we're not going to do that. It's almost like doing that, saying that to the energy department, go out and do all these audits and come up with these proposals for savings, but thanks a lot, but we're not going to bother with
You got that last one in there.
I had to sneak it in
Good.
there. I'm not done.
I know you're not.
I'm going to take a while to get over this one. Donna's not here to kind of rein me in anymore. I don't have Buddha on my side. But all joking aside, for the 4 years before, when I was on the school board, 5 maybe, I was on the school board before I came here, fund balances, the reason to have a fund balance was to stabilize the tax rate, because you never knew what the state was gonna do, and things could go crazy, so we had this little balance, so we could, instead of having to go 4, we could go 3 and sort of keep it steady at 2 or 3 or whatever. And the idea of having it as a rainy day fund, I mean, that was always considered, but we always thought, well, we'll just bond it. If the roof blows up, we'll get a new roof and pay for it over 20 years. But now we paid off a couple of big bonds, and our debt service is really nice and low, and they're kind of thinking, wow, well, it's kind of good to pay cash. So it makes sense to do that. But the point is, it's not, the 10% is arbitrary. It's made up. The League of Cities and Towns recommends it. It's not based on anything. 2 years ago, our 10%, we had to have 1.5 million. That was the 10%. Then it was 1.6 million. Now it's 1.7 as our budgets go up over the last 3 or 4 years. But I don't think that there's anything that we have done that has increased. In fact, we've done things that are the opposite of increasing our likelihood of having some catastrophe happen. I mean, we repaired walls. We've done a lot of preventive stuff. We're upgrading all the facilities and equipment and making those investments. So if anything, our danger has gone down a little bit, but that's gone up $200,000. So I feel like I would be very comfortable saying, let's take $200,000 out of there and pull this tax rate down to 3.5%. That, or go in and tighten up a couple $100,000 worth of belts. And I know that next year, okay, so we got to find another $200,000 that we took out of the reserve fund, but we may have a nice little budget. We may have a slow winter. We may not have a lot of snow. There are a lot of things that could happen. John mentioned that the energy savings are speculative, but everything we're looking at here is speculative except salaries and health insurance, and insurance kind of costs. So, I mean, I think $1.5 million is more than enough to keep us safe, and I would suggest that we give that, as Vic and John have both said, let's give that money back to the taxpayers, and let's use some of that to reduce the rate. And as well, I would ask that, I'm not sure what that'll do. That'll be take $0.015 or so off, I guess. Not sure where you'd get the other bit of it, but to go back and find some more savings or some reductions, some things that we can get along without, because we've got this two-headed infrastructure strategy.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? I'm confused. So you want to take more money out of the surplus,
Yes,
but to do what with?
to reduce the tax rate.
To what?
I was recommending 200,000 because 2 years ago, 1.5 was enough money. But we could either take as much as it would take required to get us to 3.5.
Well, do we have to take anything
We
out
don't
though?
take
to do-
anything.
We don't have to
No.
take
We don't have to
anything
take
out to
anything
get to 3.5.
No.
3.5
That's right.
cents will
Right, it leaves us with 58 in the fund balance.
Yeah.
surplus. Then you have money available next year if you want to come down.
So if you want to take 200 out, that gets us to like
It's-
1.5.
It's the second, you say applies to all three
Well, I
scenarios?
definitely did, I thought we were talking about 4.8.
So,
No, look at that scenario thing.
Oh, okay, we cut all these things out.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, and so you're right, because it's the 200 is from the pellet thing.
right.
right. Yeah, so we
Yeah.
could go to 1 without danger.
So you're still trying to get it to 1.
Well, I mean, if we're doing all this, we're investing in this, well over $1 million in 1 year in police fire, and well over $1.5 million, another $1.6 million in capital. That's a lot of money.
Can I just point out one thing? You're kind of going against what you were talking about a little while ago.
Doesn't
Because
surprise
you were
me.
saying, no, well, and it's in a good way. I mean, I think you're trying to get there, but you're going against what our town manager has recommended.
Well, only on the reserve fund,
Well, but it's
not
still
on the
like,
capital investment.
I know, but it's still like saying, well, he put a lot of thought into this, and this
Yeah.
is, and I have changed my mind on and I'm not gonna call it the slush fund, on
Surplus.
surplus, to not dip into it too much. And so, again, I think your heart's in the right place, but you're kind of going against what
Yeah,
the town manager
that
recommends.
part of it. I'm
That
not
part of
going
it.
against the capital investment and long-term planning, yeah.
So you want to get it below 3.5 cents?
I would like to.
I would love to see it at 0. So,
Yeah, I just want to make one thing clear. I think it is, but in case it's not, well, actually, two things. So first, I want to say thank you for recognizing the value of the long-term planning and remaining committed to the long-term planning. But let's make this decision and incorporate the value of that work, because the work's important. I appreciate you talking about Peter's plan, but the reason a long-term plan is so important is, please don't do it as like, look,
I'm not trying to
some
make
kind of
you happy.
recognition. No, it needs to be because of how important it is for the town and for the sustainability
Right.
Which is
our
why we
operation.
asked you to develop it.
And on that point, the most important thing here is, if we use capital, whether you decide that something less than 10% at some point is appropriate or not, I would suggest that we make that decision as a policy decision after some careful analysis rather than on the fly in the middle of a budget. But if you decide that a different number is okay, a lesser number is okay, that's a policy decision that certainly you can make. But when we use the fund balance that we've accumulated, whether it's above or below that 10% marker, we should be using it for one-time expenses. And the reason we should is for exactly that point that Dick was making about people coming in the store. If somebody's buying something in the store that is a one-off, they're getting a gift for somebody, or they're buying something that's, in a different kind of a setting, in a different kind of a store, something that's going to be a major improvement to their home or something like that, then that's an appropriate thing to charge and pay over time because of the durability of that. But unless you're going to pay the credit card at the end of the month, you shouldn't be charging the things that are part of your just daily living expenses, because then you're not living within your means. And what we've got here, as the chair pointed out, is a budget where just the new debt service, the second layer of debt service for the police fire facilities project, is equivalent to 3.5 cents on the tax rate. So anything that is less than a 3.5% increase means we're using the credit card for basic living expenses, and we're not paying in real time the expenses of operating town government. And frankly, there's a number that's north of 3.5 that's really that number, because everything else didn't stay just perfectly level this year. So we are making a terrific injection of catching up commitment to the capital this year, using that ample fund balance that we had, and that's a great thing. But now, as you make this final decision about the level of the fund balance, it's really important that you keep your eyes on the prize, that the importance of that long-term planning is so that we don't use up the fund balance on operating and find ourselves in a hole next year, that we use the fund balance for those one-time needs. And I think at either 3.5 or at 4, you've got that pretty well calibrated. I personally still would support the 4.8, where I want to view in voting on this because of what that represents in terms of, you know, the progress we've made from the 6.88 and the commitment to the long-term plan. But I understand why that's a tough one to swallow when you're looking also at, you know, short-term ability to pay for the taxpayers. I get that. So if you're inclined to go lower, I'd ask, you know, choose either the 3.5 or the 4, so that we are paying our real-time operating expenses with real-time revenues.
I move that we instruct the town manager to prepare a budget that provides for a 3.5 cent tax increase next year. Can I phrase the motion that way?
Sure.
Nice motion.
Is there any further discussion? Anybody
Just a
from
quick-
Finance Committee wants to talk to it? Dave, you want to
Yeah,
say?
just another quick question to make sure I got this, because I was looking at the 3.0. So 3.5 would leave us 127,000.
No. You're looking at the
50.
wrong one. The 3.5 is going to leave us
Approximately
$6,000.
58.
58.
The number's gonna be a little different based on the decisions made tonight, but it'll be in the neighborhood of
Okay.
$60,000. The remaining fund
Oh, we
balance.
didn't take the energy efficiency out, okay.
Right.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed or abstaining? We've got 4 to 1 to instruct the town manager to bring us back a new budget with a 3.5 cent increase. That was all of the budget work that I anticipated completing this evening. I know that Ms. Carter was here and wanted to speak to something, and it never was called as a specific item. So, Terry, why don't you take the microphone and tell us what it is that you wanted to tell us, please?
Or maybe you can inform me when would be a good time where I could put in some productive input. But the yearly funding for sidewalks and traffic safety and specifically striping, and as you well know, I have a certain area that I've been advocating for several years, and I just want to be as informed about funding and voting and, you know, what I need to do as a citizen to keep up my end of things. And when, since it didn't happen tonight, if you could give me perhaps a specific meeting or date or time where that might be more productive for everybody involved.
Well, what I'll tell you is that I think for right now, I'm going to ask Peter to explain what is the sidewalk and traffic safety and line striping commitments in this year's budget, because they're already included at higher rates than before. And so Peter will walk through what increased commitments to traffic safety have been made in this budget that we are on the verge of approving at our next meeting.
Everything that has been funded year over year is included again this year, plus 2 increases. The general...
Increase of funding.
I'm sorry?
Increase of funding.
Yes, increases in spending for 2 of the items that are in this family of items related to what goes on the streets and sidewalks and traffic safety.
Specifically, what are the 2 items?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. So one is the general traffic safety item within the operating budget is increasing from $5,000 to $10,000. It's a small amount, but it's there for addressing things that are identified through the course of a year, not so much projects, but smaller allocations of funds that make traffic safety improvements in various locations around town. The other is a much more tactical increase of $25,000 worth of sidewalk work, going from $25,000 up to $50,000, so that we can accomplish more spot improvements around the town in sidewalks that are in various states of disrepair, but some of them in really, really poor condition. So we're going to maintain in the capital fund the same amount of funding for sidewalks. That's where you do whole segments of sidewalk, whole lengths of it. But where we go like a square at a time, or doing curb cuts at an intersection, or the other kinds of things where we're safing up situations that have become unsafe, we'll be doubling our funding to $50,000.
Is this specifically just sidewalks, or would this include striping?
The sidewalk funding I just described is explicitly for sidewalks. The earlier item could potentially be for striping, depending on the circumstances. There's
one with
also
the
general public works money that's available for that sort of work on the roadway maintenance.
That's with the $5,000 increase.
I'm sorry?
The one with the $5,000 increase.
Yes.
All right, so, and the other thing that I'll note is that there is a line striping line item, I believe, in the Public Works budget. And a number of years ago, that line was cut in half, and we only did once a year line striping. And we decided, based upon a commitment to increase traffic safety and pedestrian safety, to increase that line item back up to provide for twice a year crosswalk line striping. So our crosswalks are painted both in the spring and the fall. They're painted after the winter and the plows have scraped the crosswalks off the ground, and then they're repainted just in time for winter so that they can be seen before and through the winter.
I'm aware of that.
Yeah.
But I'm specifically talking about funding for, like, what has been done on Western Avenue, and I pointed out to Peter, specifically around Crosby Street is exactly what I have been advocating for Harris Avenue on North Putney Road. And I've been going here for several years, and I'm still feeling very confused and have very little support around this issue. And so I want specifically to know how I can point me in the right direction, specifically what I can do to advocate for this.
Well, what I'll also note for you, Terry,
Yes.
is that in the budget for next year, there's money for an engineering study at the Williams Street, Western Avenue intersection.
Yes.
And there's a series of intersections throughout town that create danger for pedestrians and cyclists and motor vehicles. And an effort has been made in this budget and in the capital plan to prioritize those from the worst one and then moving through them going forward. And so while we know that you've got a particular concern about this location up here on Putney Road, a policy decision's been made by the board and by the administration thus far that there are other intersections that are more dangerous. They're going to be getting the investment of money to try to make them safer. So the places for you to advocate, I think, continue to be at the Traffic Safety Committee and here. But at this point, the board has not committed additional money to improve the issue that you've been raising for a number of years on Putney Road, because the board concluded and the administration concluded that there were other intersections in town that were just more dangerous. So, I mean, we're aware of your concerns, but the board didn't adopt them.
Can I share something?
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Terry, yeah.
I respect that, but in the course of, sitting through these traffic safety committee meetings and sometimes board meetings through the years, this is basically what I've been hearing, but for example, I know an ex-select board member who lives in a court wanted striping so his neighbors wouldn't be using up his parking spaces. And the Traffic Safety Committee railroaded that rate in. And a gentleman that came to a Traffic Safety Committee meeting and basically threw a tantrum about a big rock in his yard that the plows sometimes hit. And the town was very proactive, and within weeks, one of the members of this court where this ex-board meeting, select board person lives, actually got chauffeured here by one of the members of the one of the town employees. And somehow, certain things do seem to happen despite these conditions you express. So what's the secret? Do I have to be better connected? Do I need a higher status? Or just point me in the right direction. I would like to, to be as efficiently taken care of as certain people in town are often taken care of at places that I don't consider nearly as dangerous or of concern as this specific area. I'm not doing this because I have nothing better to do. I almost witnessed a baby carriage being sideswiped, and there's been a number of times where cars will try to bypass when a car slows down for pedestrians, and I understand the town does not feel they should put a crosswalk there for a number of reasons, and that's fine, but this specific place is so wide that even when a car does slow down for pedestrians heading north, other cars, often from out of town, from New York, will whip around the car slowing down, and they're often slowing down for pedestrians. And this brings out the she-bear in me. I risked my life. I pulled in front of that car so it wouldn't sideswipe this baby carriage. And I will fight like a cat and kill till if I have to just make my point. This is something important. It's not a private court where people need to park, don't want party people parking, or, some rock that sometimes gets hit. I mean, this is something that is very important. It's a well-used road, and as people go out of town, particularly people from out of state tend to pick up, it's something very simple. It's not costly. I'm not asking for too much, and I want some support from my community and the people I vote for. I vote for a lot of you people. I've supported you in other ways. I'm very proactive community-wise. I need help because I've been doing this for several years and I'm still feeling my way through the dark. And I hope when you respond, you will treat me with the respect that I have earned and I deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek.
Just for everybody in the audience, could you just quickly point out where that problem area is so that everybody knows?
Right. I've discussed this a number of times, but
Yep.
I understand. When you're heading north out of Brattleboro, after you go through the main town, heading out, and just before the road where the state line is, the road tends to widen, particularly where Harris Avenue is on the left, and it's a very wide mouth. And I noticed on Crosby Street, just this last year, they did what I've been trying to get them to do here for several years now. I've been requesting striping, probably where the nursery school is, probably starting there, maybe even not quite that soon, up to that curve, striping to make the road appear more narrow, that would discourage out-of-town cars, usually with New York license plates, but not necessarily, but from when they're in a hurry, they think they're heading out of town. There's a hill there. It looks like a wide horizon. A lot of cars don't realize that it's still, a congested area. And the striping, very similar to what is done on Western Avenue, would do what is working on Western Avenue, which would discourage cars from whipping around cars that actually are slowing down for pedestrians. It's a busy area. There's an old folks home. What's the name of the place?
Oh,
Bradley House is
Bradley
right there. It's a neighborhood with kids and pets and everything else. It's a busy area. And despite the fact that people are not supposed to cross there, they do anyway. And a lot of people that walk up and down Putney, Putney Road, a lot of homeless people walk from town to the motel down there, and they walk because they don't have a large income. So there's a lot, whether you like it or not, there's a lot of pedestrians crossing just before that peak. And the town really needs to put some striping, like I say, just like on Western Avenue, that will discourage out-of-town cars from passing cars that are slowing down for pedestrians, specifically and particularly where Harris Avenue is. Thank you.
Thank you. The best I can say right now is that the matter that you're raising has been raised at Traffic Safety Committee, and the solution that you are proposing, that being the use of line striping to create the illusion that the road is narrower, is not something that's approved in the manual for uniform traffic control devices. And so the Department of Public Works has communicated to us that that's not an appropriate treatment for achieving the objective that you want to. We have heard the concern that you've raised, and it's been considered by the administration and by the town in prioritizing investment of public safety and traffic safety funds. So the best venue for you to continue expressing your concern about that issue, I believe, is at the Traffic Safety Committee.
Just one question though. Why does Western Avenue qualify and not Putney Road?
Peter may be able to answer that question.
Thank you.
The striping that you see near the intersection of Crosby Street and Western Avenue is actually delineating the on-street parking that's allowed on Western Avenue. So it's not it's not being used for the purpose that you're describing or suggesting for Putney Road. There's actually on-street parking through that area, and the striping identifies the boundary between the parking lane and the travel lane.
But the main intent of that striping is because when Susan Press got killed by that bus and other casualties that winter, the town really, to their credit, fell into step and did whatever they could to discourage cars from driving unsafely on that road. And yeah, I do think they probably tweaked the rules, but yeah, it might not be specific, maybe it's specifically, technically, legally for what you're saying, cars parking, but it works. And you tweak the rules. So, rules are being tweaked all the time, locally and nationally and everywhere else. So, David's encouraged me to continue with the Traffic Safety Committee meetings. I will continue to go, but any type of support, insight, or help that any of you are willing to give me, I would greatly appreciate it, because I've been coming to your meetings for several years now, and I'm not going to quit.
Dave?
Yeah,
Okay.
has public service come up with, or public safety come up with a different plan or different remedy for that intersection, for that area? I mean, striping is not not acceptable. So has there been another plan that we know what it costs, and it's just gotta get up higher on the list?
I wanna make clear, because this is really off agenda, but I'll respond to this right now. If there's a need to address this more thoroughly at this level, we certainly can consider that, but this is, well beyond the scope of budget-related matters at this point. Concern has been expressed by Ms. Carter about safety on the portion of Putney Road north of, what is it, the First Baptist Church up there? What's it called?
The
First
Episcopal.
Episcopal Church,
yeah.
where the nursery school is. And what's been noted is that at traffic safety is that because of sight distance issues, additional crosswalks would not be safe north of
Bradley Avenue.
Bradley Avenue because vehicles don't have sight to be able to stop effectively, and people would be given a false sense of security in crosswalks in that location.
And also, there's only sidewalk on one side of the road there.
Right.
So crosswalks need to connect a sidewalk to a sidewalk.
So we don't have sidewalk on the east, and so there's no possibility of installing additional crosswalks. Line striping to create the illusion that the road is narrower is not approved in the manual for uniform traffic control devices. So the only other alternative would be to do engineering related work to investigate the possibility of narrowing the entirety of the intersection in the north part of that roadway. And the layout and the risks in that area have not been determined to warrant that level of investment as a higher priority than other traffic safety investments around town. And so there is, like I say, a priority list of intersections for engineering that's included in the long-term capital plan.
But
And it's
there are
been,
all those
there's a lot
fork
of
intersections.
fork intersections that we've got it down. And this has been the subject of extensive discussion at traffic safety. We've listened, in good faith to those concerns. We hear them. Traffic safety as a group has made its best recommendations to the board about how the town's resources should be dedicated. Peter?
Yeah, and just so that the public's aware, the 5 intersections that have been identified in the 5-year capital improvement program are Williams and Western for this year to have the engineering done this year. And then the 4 that follow are Green and High, Maple and Fairview, Canal and Maple, and Cotton Mill Hill and Route 142.
Who made these decisions? Who specifically made these?
The recommendation comes from staff to the select board. It was after consultation with the traffic safety committee.
So like Steve Barrett and the people that work on the roads
Yeah,
recommended it to.
Public
Traffic
Works
safety
Department
committee.
together. I mean, ultimately, all the recommendations that come from staff to the board are my responsibility in terms of recommending an annual budget and a capital improvement program. Certainly, this component of it is something where Public Works advice was important, but so was the consideration at traffic safety. So were prior conversations that we had here at the board about different situations that we've seen.
So I want to thank you for expressing your concern. We're going to move on to the next agenda item. But I want to thank you and encourage you to continue raising your concern during public comment and at traffic safety.
Well, and thank you, and I encourage anybody, like I say, I've been coming here for years, and people have my contact information. If anyone wants to help me navigate this through information and just insight that someone like myself is hard to acquire because I have other priorities in my life, feel free to contact me. I, in fact, would greatly appreciate it. And thank you for letting me express myself.
Thank you, dear.
Yeah.
The next item on the agenda for tonight is to make a decision about the solar net metering agreements. And the first item is a proposed settlement of the litigation with NextSun. Maybe I'll ask Bob just briefly to say for the public what was the result of the last procedural step in the NextSun litigation and what the proposed settlement agreement calls for.
So with regard to our suit with NextSun, we brought a suit to reinstate the contract that had been unilaterally terminated by NextSun. And NextSun then moved to dismiss that complaint in court. That was filed last summer. We opposed that motion to dismiss, and the court found in our favor. So the case at this point proceeds if we want to. However, given the other proposed solar project at the Windham Solid Waste Management District, the so-called landfill solar project, there is, the second part of tonight is to discuss that as to whether we want to essentially put all of our eggs in that basket, which at this point, given the length of the litigation to go forward, just because we won the first battle doesn't necessarily mean that we will win the war. We think we have good arguments for the reinstatement of that contract, as well as the town's interpretation of what that contract said with regard to the price that we would be paying for the services provided by the solar company. So at this point, in speaking with the attorney for NextSun, NextSun would be willing to walk away from that litigation so long as the town's willing to walk away from it. If you agree or make a motion to do that, we have the signatures from NextSun to be able to do that. And then you can put, essentially go down the route of the other solar project.
And when we, if we agree to settle the litigation matter, at this point we have $33,000, I understand, in escrow, which would have been available to pay what NextSun claims we owe them.
That's correct. And that would remain with the town with the settlement. So when we originally were billed by NextSun, the finance director, John O'Connor, noticed, well, we shouldn't be paying that amount, and that's what created that controversy in the first place. So we paid the amount that the town interpreted the contract under our interpretation to NextSun and set aside the difference just so that if indeed a court found in their favor, we'd have the money with which to pay it. So that money would be released to the town as part of this settlement.
There you go, some extra fund balance for next year. So does anybody have any questions about the proposed settlement of the NextSun litigation? Essentially, we're gonna both walk away and we're gonna take the $33,000, and then if we're gonna do an additional solar credit agreement, we'll enter into it with a different vendor.
Yep.
Peter?
Yeah, I'd like to just note one thing for the record and for the public, that in addition to just resolving what has been a difficult matter and freeing up that $33,000, it's important also that this settlement will free up the 3 largest accounts for all the town facilities. So we have upwards of 20 electric accounts for all the various facilities that the town operates, and the 3 largest together have, I believe, a vast majority. There's a bunch of smaller accounts underneath that, but the 3 largest stand out as being, far greater than all the others. And those 3 are the ones that have been tied up in this NextSun matter. So by settling with NextSun, those 3 become available for the next item that we're going to discuss, or some other location if we were to get involved in another solar array. So,
I move that the town of Brattleboro approve the settlement and dismissal of the lawsuit NextSun against the town of Brattleboro, and the town of Brattleboro against NextSun, and that we authorize the town manager to execute the settlement documents in the general mutual release. Is there any further discussion? I have 3 words that I think were missed on the release that I'll give to you to look at.
Thank you. Be happy to amend that.
To look at it anyway.
Okay.
No further discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? That carries 4-0 with Dave out of the room temporarily. Then the next and last item on tonight's agenda is the question whether we want to enter into a proposed agreement with Sky Solar for participation in the project of the Windham Solid Waste Management District. Peter, if you would speak to that, please.
sure. We can go further into the details as deeply as you'd like, but we have discussed this on prior occasions, so I'm going to summarize by saying, as I said a moment ago, there's an opportunity now to take our 3 largest accounts as well as 15 smaller accounts and commit to being an off-taker at the solar array that's proposed to be built on the closed landfill of the Windham Solid Waste Management District. And this has multiple benefits for the town. So as an off-taker, based on the value of our accounts, it's estimated that we'll save $85,000 a year. In the spirit of all the rest of the conversation we've had around budget this evening, I want to make clear that that's once the array has been fully constructed and is fully operational. So that's not an $85,000 credit towards the FY18 budget, but it will be indeed real savings in long-term planning that will help us afford other things or keep taxes down in the future. But in addition to that, because this is located here in Brattleboro, we'll receive some tax revenue from this if it does go forward. It has a better chance of going forward if we participate in the project. We would be a large off-taker. There would be others that are being assembled to be the full array of participants in the project. And so if that does go forward, it's estimated that the town will receive upwards of $60,000 a year in property tax revenue from the construction of this facility. And then thirdly, and to a number that we can't adequately define, but yet there's a benefit involved, because we are a member of the Windham Solid Waste Management District, the district is going to make lease revenue off of this, and that will, in the net of all the different expenses and revenues up at the district, accrue to the benefit of all the different members in terms of keeping our assessments lower than they otherwise would have had to be if this lease revenue wasn't being provided. So
That's about 120,000 a year.
about 120,000 a year, so about $40,000 of that would be the town's share, about 1/3. All in all, it's it's not completely without risk. We've been through the discussions and the concerns regarding the uncertainties involved in certain aspects of this, but we do believe that it is appropriate to move forward, that the benefits outweigh those risks, and the financial benefits to the town could be very significant. So staff recommends that you do authorize us to finalize the terms of an agreement with Sky Solar for the town to become an off-taker using those 18 largest accounts.
Dave?
I just want to be clear, the contract that we're signing, there's no risk to the town in the contract. The potential risk is that, unless there's more than I understand, the potential risk is that the contract could be sold to somebody else and they could be a pain in the neck like NextSun was and drive us crazy, basically, or try to renegotiate the terms. But the contract itself, it includes we're pretty much, we have no liability if plane lands in the field or something like that. There's no liability for us at all.
Matt?
Yeah, go ahead.
That's correct. We don't have responsibility or liability for the actual installation. There are certain aspects of the contract that in the negotiations over the last several months, we actually had work to try to make more protective of the town's interests, and we've been successful at some of that and unsuccessful at other parts of it. We've decided, we collectively, between Bob's legal advice and our staff recommendation to you, lots of participation from the Energy Committee on this, and lots of good help to get us understanding the details of both how these operate and the financial benefit to the town. In the fullness of all that, we think the downside risk is worth taking on in order to gain the very substantial benefit that's available, but there is still some downside risk, and the most important of those is the one that you mentioned. It is likely that after the array is built, the agreements will be sold to a different operator. And it is exactly that circumstance that caused an agreement that in the first instance wasn't in dispute with the developer of the last array that we were involved with. But when it got sold to NextSun, NextSun interpreted the contract differently, and we did have a dispute that became, quite difficult to resolve. So it's for those reasons we just, say in terms of full disclosure, eyes wide open, entering into this thing, we think that there is a small probability that this could happen again because it's a, sort of not fully settled field. But on the other hand, those kinds of bad experiences have been rare, is our understanding. We were unfortunately one who experienced one. And the upside benefit of this compared to the downside risk is very significant. And so we recommend that you approve that we participate.
Anybody from the board?
Yeah, I just want to ask a couple questions, follow up. Was it the contract, because you said that NextSun interpreted the contract differently.
Yes.
So was the contract not as ironclad as the one we're trying to get now? Like,
This is a much better contract. Again, there are ways in which we think it could even have been better. And when I say that, I don't mean one-sided, but just fairer in terms of balancing the interests of the developer and the off-takers. But the developer ultimately gets to decide what they'll agree to and what they won't, and maybe other off-takers would be willing to agree to things. So there were several different issues we addressed that were like that, and most of those were addressed to the town's satisfaction. One that was important to us because of the NextSun experience was that we wanted more of an ability to participate in the decision about whether or not we would be sold, whether this agreement would be sold to some other operator of the facility, and the developer ultimately said no, that they needed to retain the right to assign the agreement to whomever they might sell to. In the end, we had to weigh that versus all the upside benefits of this, and have come to this recommendation to you that we think that it's worthwhile to participate.
well, I think my question though goes back to NextSun interpreted the contract differently
Yes.
than whoever, Green Lantern or whatever they were.
Yes.
I guess I'm confused. Was that contract just loosey-goosey compared to the one we're doing now? Like, how did it get interpreted differently, and why can't the next person, if we go into this one, is there something that they could interpret differently? Do you see what I'm trying to say?
So I'm going to defer to Bob. But go ahead.
Well, just to pick up on that, with regard to that, there were two amendments to that first one. And it was in the amendments where the interpretation took place. So it had less to do with the regular boilerplate language of that contract. But one of the more significant differences between that contract and the new one is that in that one there was a downside risk to the town as far as the language in it. In the new one, there really isn't a downside risk to the town with regard to the amount of electricity. So if the photovoltaic cells aren't producing, we're not going to be paying any more than the credits that we are getting. So and the so-called solar adder, which gets into the details of the statute, but the disagreement with NextSun had to do with how that, or to which entity, the solar company or the town, receive the benefit of that subsidy or benefit from the state. In the new contract, it's very clear that that's coming to the customer, the town. So that has been made clearer. That wasn't necessarily, it was part of the issue with the NextSun, but not the entire issue, due to the amendments that happened to that first contract.
Okay, and the amendments came when NextSun purchased.
Right.
That's right,
Okay.
because when they purchased, we had signed up for 100%, and lo and behold, NextSun wasn't able to give that because they had also sold some to the town of Putney. So they had to then give us part of what we had allocated toward our utility bills from another solar project.
But now that we know, if this were ever to be sold,
Yes.
and there were amendments, could we have walked away and said, we're not gonna go?
No,
with
see,
that?
that's the thing you need to know about the entering into this eyes wide open is they can sell us to anybody.
Yeah,
Whoever they sell us to might or might not want to negotiate terms of an amendment.
Right.
We, of course, would be able to decide whether or not to participate in such an amendment.
Yeah, that's
But
what-
if they wanted an amendment and we resisted that, and that led to, some kind of a dispute, then in that situation, we'd be back, not necessarily in the same situation, but in another tangled situation, which is why we wanted to have a say in whether we could be sold and to whom we could be sold.
right.
We're giving up on that issue. That's an important issue
Yeah.
because we got other protections in the course of the negotiations, and because we believe that the risk of this running afoul is small compared to the very substantial benefit that it can provide, over $100,000 a year worth of benefit to the town.
Are you finished?
Okay, just one more question. I know there are other towns and school districts involved in this. Is there gonna be one contract, or are we each having different, is the contract language gonna be the same for everybody, or is one town gonna have something different and one school have something
There
different?
is potential for different contracts between the different school districts and towns, but my understanding is that Sky Solar is working hard to have one agreement that works for everybody. So, and I would just note that assignability issue is still open under the current version. They don't want to have the assignment with consent of the town. It's still an open issue with some of the other towns. So if we're lucky, they will come around and allow the contract to be assigned only with the consent of the customers, but in their current version, they don't have that.
And you'll know that for sure when it comes time for your final approval. All we're asking for tonight is that you indicate that the town wants to participate in this and direct us to go get a final agreement that we can bring back to you for approval.
So there's no strength in numbers, getting all the towns and schools to come together and say, we won't do this unless you let us. That's sort of my question.
Well, there is, and interestingly enough, the model contract that the League of Cities and Towns has put out does have the assignability only with the consent of the customer, and believe me, I've pointed that out to Sky Solar's attorney. So it's an open issue, but we're pushing on that. But the point for tonight is that we think that the overall benefits from going into this project outweigh these legal risks.
So, I think it was about 4 years ago that the Energy Committee recommended to the Select Board that we buy onto the original net metering credit agreement with Green Lantern. And it was presented to the board as a no-risk situation. They want to throw money at you, and you can't lose, so you should take the money and join up. What I have learned over the course of 3 or 4 years of dealing with this net metering credit setup is that in an effort to incentivize the development of solar power grid, a form of public-private partnership has been developed where there is risk of private entities trying to engage in profiteering. And it turned out that this was not
a no-risk situation for the town, where the solar vendors were just gonna throw money at us to participate, because we wound up with very, very difficult contract issues with the vendor that resulted in litigation. And I
This was
think
after the sale, though.
it was after the sale, but could have been the
Right,
first vendor
right.
just like the second one.
Right.
And I think collectively, the administration and the town attorney and the board have spent hundreds of hours, literally hundreds of hours, dealing with these net metering agreements, such that I'm not convinced at this time that the town of Brattleboro has saved any money over the course of the last 4 years, when you balance out what we've had to spend in order to get the money off the net metering credits. And I consider that to be a risk going forward, just like it proved to be a risk in the past. Now, other municipal entities have not had this negative experience. I understand that the school district didn't have any problem with their vendor, and they just continue to rake in the cash.
Well, we did, but we didn't respond. We didn't amend.
All right, they didn't amend. Meanwhile, based upon all the complicating factors, I was very skeptical about entering into another agreement. But I've come around, and I'm in favor of entering into this new contract right now, both because I think that we are at a much higher level of sophistication than we were before in negotiating. I think we've taken the steps to try to protect the town's interests better in this agreement going forward. And also, I think that the board needs to be much more aware going forward of the risks, to the extent that there's assignment, and to the extent that potential disputes may arise. I think the town needs to be very wary about getting sucked into complicated litigation going forward, and needs to be prepared to walk away rather than fighting to the extent that that becomes a problem later on. But for right now, it seems to me that, given the steps that have been taken, this is probably a good thing for the town. And so now I'm in favor of it.
And I don't think lightning can strike twice.
Sure.
Now, when we get this, we're gonna go through it, so people can say, you know, Bob will go through each point with us, right? And say,
If you want.
because I sort of still feel, you know, we're talking sort of vaguely about, well, there's some things that are good, there's some things that are bad. So I think it would be,
Good things.
well, I just wanna know, because we haven't really, I mean, we've talked about it a little bit, we've never gone through except for the, selling it thing. I just wanna know what's in the contract, like, I sort of feel like I don't know. And I know that sounds stupid, because we have
It's
been
not
sort
in
of
front of
vaguely
you
talking
No.
about it,
right
yeah.
now. So, yeah, when we bring it back and ask you to approve it,
Okay,
we'll identify what we deem to be strengths and weaknesses of it.
okay.
No
But
problem.
this is
That's all-
just
that's what I'm
preliminary.
asking for.
This is just to get us moving.
And so you're requesting a motion that we authorize town manager and the town attorney to continue negotiations with Sky Solar, with the goal of presenting to the select board a contract for approval for us entering into a net metering credit agreement and participating in the Windham Solid Waste Management District Solar Array sponsored by Sky Solar. Please don't ask me to repeat that.
So moved.
Jan's got it.
It's on the recorder.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have anything to say about that? Go ahead, Lester.
I guess I'll be quick here, because I wanna have you guys continue. But I just wanna respond to a little bit of what you said there, David. The Energy Committee was involved in presenting this, and I'll have to look back, but I don't think we ever said no risk. I think what we were talking about was low risk. And I know in the last slide that was presented, we were very careful to not say no risk, even though I've heard you present it that way, that we said no risk, when that's not the case. The point that we were making was that the town is not having to invest in the system, is not having to put up any capital, and the savings is contractually binding and legally binding. And if the project is sold to another company, the contract will stay in force exactly as written and will still be legally binding. And so I think Bob Fisher has done a great job in going through this contract and looking at every detail from the learning that I agree with you, David, that has come from this, and to make sure that there aren't problems going forward. So I just want to reiterate, this is a legally binding contract that will result in savings with no investment, no financial investment. And if things go wrong, I think the staff and the legal people that we have can handle it. And at the same time, it's unfortunate that things went wrong with the last contract, and I think that forward, that's not likely to happen again, and if it does, I think we can handle it, and we should make sure we pay attention to how much time it takes up, but I think we're prepared.
Any further comments, Bob?
Just two quick things. One, with regard to this new contract, in my view, is far better than the first contract because there's a provision in there that what we pay to Sky Solar will never exceed the net metering credits that we receive. So that's a much better contractual situation. And the only other thing is that I would agree with you, David, that we've spent many, many, many hours on this, but it has not cost the town any more money given the way our contract is written, as well as all the time that the Energy Committee and Lester, as far as Lester teaching me the industry, has been volunteer from Lester's standpoint. So I really appreciate that. That's why we have an Energy Committee, and when the two work together, we come up with what we hope is a much better contract going forward. So the whole idea here is that we think rather than spend a very long contract with a company, even assuming we were to go forward with the NextSun, that a company that we haven't had a good relationship with, it makes much more sense to jump into this new project with a better contract, with hopefully a company that is going to stay around, but even if they do assign it, we've got a better contract on which to stand.
I guess what I'll note is that there were very significant time commitments that had to be spent by not just town attorney, but also staff members.
Absolutely.
And that a very significant amount of hours took away from other work that could have and should have been being accomplished, that would have had us further along in achieving our goals. And that's really unfortunate. It was a very negative consequence of the initial net metering agreement, and we certainly hope it can be avoided in the future, or that we can walk away rather than spending all that time.
Right, agreed.
Yeah. Lester?
Yeah, I agree with that as well. It's very unfortunate. Last one quick thing I want to point out was if the project is canceled, as is the plan that you guys voted on tonight, there will be $55,000 or so dollars in income from NextSun. So from a financial point of view, it will be profitable, but then we have to then look at the time against that.
Where's that, 55?
I don't know where the 55 comes from. It's 33 in escrow.
And
And
well,
20,
33 plus 20, 25 that we've already received.
The total.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Right, so that's the total over like the
So it's
entire
25
period, yeah.
plus 33 will be the total income while the contract was in place.
We have a motion to authorize town attorney and town manager to work towards final agreement with Sky Solar as previously stated. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? That carries 5-0. Is there any further business coming in front of the meeting? Ready for motion to adjourn. We have a motion to adjourn. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? That carries 5-0. I want to thank everybody who's been watching us live or recorded on TV. I want to thank our ASL interpreters, our member of the press, our BCTV operator, everybody who's been in attendance and who's contributed to the meeting. Good night.
Thank you.